Welcome to Potter Eclipse. Today's adventure. Harry's accidental magic hatched a dragon egg at age 6 and it imprinted on him forever. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The hatching. The cupboard under the stairs was 11 bricks long and 4 bricks wide, and Harry Potter had measured it with his hands so many times that he could find the cracks in the dark. He was finding them now. His thumbnail traced the line of mortar above his head while the house breathed around him. Uncle Vernon's snore through the ceiling, the tick of the cooling boiler, the small dry skitter of the spider that lived in the corner and never once in 6 years had bitten him. The spider was the only thing in the house that had never hurt him. He had decided long ago that this made them something like friends. The lock had been turned at 6 o'clock. It was a small brass thing, fitted to the outside of the cupboard door. The week Harry had turned 3 and learned to open it himself, and it made a particular click when it shut that he could hear in his sleep. Tonight it had clicked because of the wig. He had not meant to do anything to Miss Prout's wig. He had not meant to do anything at all. He had only been standing at the back of the classroom while she read the register, hungry in the particular hollow way that meant he had not eaten since the toast Dudley had thrown at the bin and missed, and Piers Polkiss had whispered that Harry Potter's parents had been drunks who'd driven into a wall, and the wanting had come up in Harry like water from a deep place. He had wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, for the world to stop being the world for 1 second. The wig had turned blue. Then it had lifted off Miss Prout's head and floated, gentle as a soap bubble, to settle on the globe by the window where it perched on the North Pole like a small blue animal that had crawled up there to die. Nobody had laughed. That was the worst of it. In the films, when something like that happened, everybody laughed. Instead, the room had gone very quiet, and 28 children had turned to look at Harry as though a window had opened in his chest and they could all see something moving inside it. Miss Prout had sent a note home. Uncle Vernon had read it at the table, gone the color of corned beef, and put Harry in the cupboard without supper, and with the particular sentence Harry hated most: "We'll have no more of your funny business under this roof." Funny business, as if Harry chose it, as if there were a switch behind his ear that he flicked for the pleasure of ruining things. He pressed his forehead against the cool brick and tried not to be hungry. This was a skill he had, and he was good at it, the way Dudley was good at jumping on Harry's stomach, and Aunt Petunia was good at pretending the cupboard wasn't there when guests came. You took the hunger and you made it smaller. You folded it up and put it in a place behind your ribs, and you sat on the lid. Tonight the lid would not stay shut. Tonight the hunger had a sound to it, a thin high whine like a kettle a long way off, and underneath the whine was the wanting again, the same wanting that had floated the wig, rising and rising with nowhere to go. There was a rock in the cupboard with him. He had forgotten about the rock, and remembering it now was strange, because it was not the sort of thing a person forgot. It sat in the far corner past the leg of the broken vacuum cleaner, wrapped in the gray jumper Harry had grown out of, and it was the size of a rugby ball and far too heavy for its size, and warm. It had always been warm. He had found it 3 weeks ago, half sunk in the flower bed under the front window, the morning after the bins had been knocked over on Wisteria Walk, and a lorry had jackknifed on the corner and spilled crates of something the men in overalls had come to collect in the rain. Harry had been made to weed the bed before school. His fingers had closed on the rock, and the wanting had jumped in him like a struck match, and he had not been able to explain, even to himself, why he had wrapped it in his jumper and smuggled it inside and hidden it in the one place in the world that was his. It was not a rock. He had known that the way you know things in dreams without being told. It was an egg. It was black, and when he held it to the slatted light from the hall, it was not black at all, but full of a deep red that moved, slow, like coals turned over in a grate. He had pressed his ear to it once and heard, very faint, a sound that was not his own heartbeat keeping time with his own heartbeat. He pulled it into his lap now because he was cold and it was warm, and because the whine in his head had become unbearable, and the egg was the only thing that had ever made him feel less alone. "I'm so hungry," he told it, which was a stupid thing to tell an egg. "I'm so hungry I could die." He did not mean it the way grown-ups meant it. He meant it the way a 6-year-old means it, which is to say completely, with his whole body, with no part of him held back to keep it from being true. He bent over the egg in the dark with his arms around it and his cheek against the warm shell, and he wanted to not be hungry. He wanted to not be alone. He wanted the world to stop being the world, and the wanting came up out of the deep place all at once, all of it, more than had ever come at once before, and this time it did not float a wig or turn anything blue. This time it went into the egg. Harry felt it leave him. That was the part he would never be able to describe to anyone, not for years, not until he understood it from the other side. He felt the wanting pour out of his chest and down his arms and into the shell like water finding a crack, and the egg drank it. The whine in his head stopped. The cold stopped. Heat came up through the shell against his cheek, not the steady warmth he knew, but a climbing heat, a furnace waking, and under his hands the slow red coals were not slow anymore. They raced. They spun. The black shell lit from within until Harry could see the bones of his own fingers through it, dark lines against a sunrise, and the cupboard under the stairs filled with light. It was a strange light. Harry would think about it for the rest of his life and never find the right word. It did not throw shadows. The leg of the vacuum cleaner did not cast a black stripe across the floor. The light went around it, into it, as if it came from everywhere at once, as if the dark itself had been hiding it. It was the color of the moment after a fire when the flame has gone and the embers remember it. It filled the cupboard and did not spill out under the door, and Harry understood in the wordless way that it was hiding too, that it had always known how to hide, that it was very, very old. Then the egg cracked. The sound was not loud. It was a single clean note, like a wineglass touched with a fingernail, and a line opened across the shelf from end to end, and out of the line came a breath of air that smelled of hot iron and lightning in the inside of a chimney, and a piece of shell fell away into Harry's lap. In the gap was an eye. It was gold. Not yellow, gold, the gold of the rim around the moon. On the one night a year the moon went the color of blood, a thin ring of fierce light around a black center, and the black center was not empty. There were stars in it. Harry leaned closer because he could not help it, and the eye turned, slow, wet, newborn, and found him and fixed on him, and did not look away. Something reached out of the dark behind the eye and touched the middle of Harry's chest. He felt it land. He would feel it land for the rest of his life, the precise place, 2 inches left of his breastbone, a warmth, a weight, a thread pulled taut between him and the thing in the shell, fine as a hair and strong as a chain, and at the far end of it was a feeling that was not Harry's feeling, coming into Harry the way light comes through a window. It was wonder. It was hunger, like his own hunger, but cleaner, simpler, brand new. And under the wonder and the hunger, older than either, was a single certainty so total that Harry's eyes filled with tears before he understood why. The thing in the shell looked at Harry Potter, who had been told every day of his life by everyone who knew him that he was a burden and a freak and a thing that should never have been left on a doorstep, and it decided in the half-second of its first heartbeat that he was the most important creature that had ever existed. It decided that he was its. It decided that it was his. "Hello," Harry whispered. The shell broke the rest of the way, and she climbed out into his hands. She was the size of a cat, though wronger than a cat in every line, too long in the neck, too sharp in the joints, a thing of folded angles still wet from the egg. Her scales were black, soaked coal black, and where they overlapped there ran thin veins of ember gold, so that she looked like a hearth seen through a grate at the hour it begins to die. Her wings were stuck to her sides, crumpled and damp, no bigger than the leaves of the rubber plant in the lounge. Her tail wrapped twice around Harry's wrist and gripped. Her claws were the only part of her that already looked finished, small and curved and perfectly black, the black of a thing made to open other things, and she set them, careful, into the meat of Harry's thumb and did not break the skin. She looked up at him and made a sound. It was not a roar. It was the smallest sound in the world, a click and a chirr deep in the throat, the sound a kettle makes in the second before it boils, and it meant, Harry knew exactly what it meant. The knowledge came down the thread into his chest. It meant, "Where have you been?" "I'm here," Harry said. His voice shook. He had never in his life had reason to use the next words, and they came out of him as though they had been waiting his whole life behind his teeth. "I'm here. I've got you. I've got you." She climbed up his front, hooking claw over claw in the fabric of his too big jumper, and pushed her head up under his chin and went still. And the heat of her against his throat was the heat of a hot water bottle, of the airing cupboard, of every warm thing Harry had been shut out of. And he held her there with both hands and wept without any sound at all, because crying with sound got the door unlocked and bowed his head over her. And for the first time in his remembered life he was not alone. The light went out slowly, banking down into her scales until the cupboard was only dark again, and her gold eyes were the brightest things in it. He learned in the next hour the shape of what had happened to him, though he had no words for any of it. He learned that he could feel her. Not just the weight of her, asleep now in the hollow of his crossed legs, but the inside of her, the small furnace of her, the slow turning of her newborn thoughts, which were not thoughts in words but in pictures and wants, warm, dark, safe, mine, coming and going down the thread in his chest like beads on a string. When she dreamed, he felt the dream brush past. When she woke and could not find him in the dark and the bright fear spiked through her, he felt that too, and he put his hand on her and the fear went out, and the going out of it felt to Harry like the best thing he had ever done. He learned that she was hungry, and that her hunger was now somehow the most urgent fact in his world, more urgent than his own, which had not gone away. He had half a slice of bread saved in his sock, going stale, kept against exactly this kind of night. He broke it small, and she ate it from his fingers with a delicacy that did not match her claws, and it was not enough, and he knew it was not enough, and the knowledge sat in him like a stone. And he learned the thing that mattered most, the thing that arranged everything that came after, and he learned it not by being told but by simple arithmetic, because Harry Potter had been doing the arithmetic of survival since before he could read. If they found her, they would take her. He did not know who they were. He did not need to. The Dursleys were a fixed star in Harry's sky, and he knew the law of them the way he knew the law that water ran downhill. Anything Harry loved, the Dursleys would find a way to remove. They had given away the school guinea pig because Harry had been the only one who could make it come when called. They had thrown out the blanket he liked because liking it was funny business. If Aunt Petunia opened this door tomorrow and found a black dragon the size of a cat asleep in her nephew's lap, there was no version of the next 10 minutes that ended with Harry keeping her. There was the version where Uncle Vernon's hands closed around her. There was the version where men came in a van. There was no version where she stayed, so no one could know. It was as simple as that and as enormous. The 6-year-old looked at the only good thing that had ever happened to him and understood that to keep it he would have to become, overnight, a person who could keep a secret from the entire world, from his aunt who searched his cupboard, from his uncle who watched him at meals, from the teachers who had already learned to look at him sideways, from the whole great machinery of grown-ups that existed, as far as Harry could tell, mainly to find out what children did not want them to know and to take it away. He thought about it in the dark with his hand on her side, feeling her breath go in and out, and he was not frightened. That surprised him. He had been frightened his whole life of Uncle Vernon's belt and Dudley's gang in the dark in the future, and now, with the most dangerous secret a person could have asleep in his lap, the fear was simply gone. In its place was something he had no name for and would later learn to call purpose. "They can't have you," he told her very quietly, and down the thread he felt her stir and settle, as though she had heard not the words but the iron under them. "I don't care what I have to do. They can't have you. I'll keep you secret if it kills me." He named her that night before he slept. He thought about it carefully, because it seemed to him the most important thing he had ever decided, more important than anything a grown-up had ever let him decide. He thought of the light that had filled the cupboard, the color of fire remembering itself. He thought of the warmth that had been the only kind thing in a house of cold. He thought of the slow red coals turning in the shell, the thing that had been the first to want him and the only thing that ever would. "Ember," he whispered. "I'm going to call you Ember." She opened one gold eye in the dark, and the thread in his chest pulled warm and tight and sure, and Harry understood that she had taken the name and would keep it, and that nothing now, for as long as either of them lived, would be the same. In the morning Aunt Petunia turned the lock at 6:30 and rapped on the door and told him to get up and see to the bacon and not to dawdle. And Harry said, "Yes, Aunt Petunia," in his ordinary cupboard voice, the flat, dead careful voice he used to give the grown-ups nothing. And behind him in the dark a creature the size of a cat folded herself into the gray jumper and went still as a stone and did not make a sound. The secret had begun. It was nearly ended by lunchtime. Aunt Petunia had a horror of dirt that ran in her like a religion, and the cupboard under the stairs was the one part of her clean white house that she could not see into without bending down and looking, which she despised doing. But she did it sometimes, without warning, when the mood took her, flung the door wide, and ran her eyes over the dark for evidence of whatever it was she imagined Harry got up to in there. She did it that morning while Harry was at the sink with his hands in greasy water, and Harry heard the brass click and the door swing and his whole body went to ice. Ember was in the cupboard, folded in the gray jumper, yes, still as a stone, but the jumper was a jumper, and what was under it was the shape of a sleeping animal, and Petunia's eyes were on it. Harry did not turn around. Turning around would draw her eyes to his face, and his face would betray everything. He kept his hands in the water, and he reached, without knowing he could, down the thread in his chest, and he pushed at the warmth on the other end of it as you might press a finger to a child's lips. "Still, stay small, don't move." And the thing in the cupboard, which was a day old and understood nothing of ants or vans or the law, understood him. The thread went taut and obedient. Down it came a flush of effort, of squeezing in, of making less, and through the open cupboard door, though Harry could not see it, the lump under the gray jumper drew in on itself and grew smaller and smaller until it might have been a folded jumper after all, until it might have been nothing. "What's this hole?" said Aunt Petunia. Harry's heart stopped. The scorch the egg had left in the floor, a black ring the size of a saucer where the heat had been worst. "I knocked the iron off the shelf," Harry said in the flat, dead voice, not turning. "Last week. I'm sorry, Aunt Petunia, I'll scrub it." It was the right lie because it was a boring lie, a lie that fit the Harry she expected, a clumsy, useless boy who broke things. He heard her make the small, disgusted sound that meant the matter was closed and beneath her, and the door swung shut and the brass clicked, and Harry stood at the sink with his hands shaking in the cold grease and learned, in one held breath, the most important lesson of his new life, that the secret would not be kept by luck. It would be kept by the two of them together, reaching down the thread every single time, that he was not hiding a dragon. They were hiding, the two of them, and she would help, and the helping was a thing they could practice. He dried his hands and went back to the bacon and did not let his face do anything at all, and behind the cupboard door a creature the size of a cat held herself small as a fist and was proud, in a wordless newborn way, that she had done the thing her person had asked. He saw her make fire on the second night. She had been restless since dark, pacing the 11 bricks length of the cupboard on claws that no longer quite fit the floorboards give, her gold eyes the only light, and down the thread Harry felt a pressure building in her, an itch behind her teeth, a wanting that was hers and not borrowed from him. He sat against the back wall with his knees up and watched her, fascinated past fear. She stopped. She lowered her head. The veins of ember gold under her black scales brightened, ran, gathered toward her throat the way the slow red had gathered in the egg, and Harry felt the heat of it climb on his face from 3 feet away. Her jaws opened. And out of her came not a roar and not a torrent, but a single small flame, the size of a candle, a perfect held tongue of fire that hung in the air of the cupboard and turned the color of the light that did not throw shadows, red at the root, ember gold in the body, and at its tip a blue so dark it was almost black, the blue of the sky just before the last light goes. It hung there. It did not catch the jumper. It did not catch the wood. It burned impossibly on nothing, and Harry understood without being told that this was no more ordinary fire than ember was an ordinary anything, that it burned because she wanted it to and stopped where she wanted it to stop, and that the wood was only safe because she had decided the wood was not for burning. He reached out his hand toward it before he could think better of it. Stupid. He knew it was stupid even as he did it. But the thread in his chest told him it was safe as it had told him she was his, and he trusted the thread now more than his own caution, and so Harry Potter put his bare palm into a dragon's fire. It did not burn him. It was warm, wonderfully, deeply warm, the warm of a bath, of summer pavement, of every heat he had been shut out from, but it did not burn, and when he closed his fingers gently around the small flame, it sat in his cupped hand like a living coal and lit the bones of his fingers red, and down the thread came a feeling Harry would spend years learning to read and never read more clearly than that first time. It was recognition. It was the feeling of a thing that had found, at last, the one other creature in the world made of the same stuff as itself. The fire is yours too, it said. It will never hurt you. We are the same. Harry sat in the dark with a dragon's flame burning soft and harmless in his 6-year-old hand, and he laughed silently, helplessly, tears running down his face, his whole chest aching with a thing he had never felt before and would later learn to call joy. And Ember pushed her head up under his chin and the flame went out, gentle, snuffed by no breath, and they sat together in the warm dark, the boy and the dragon and the fire that ran in both of them. Harry stopped being afraid of being burned for the rest of his life. 60 miles away, in a tall, thin house in a part of London that did not appear on the maps ordinary people used, a man named Corvin Greaves was being told that he had lost a fortune, and he was not raising his voice. This was, to the man telling him, far more frightening than if he had. The courier, a wide, soft, sweating wizard named Dabbs who handled freight for people who did not use the official channels, had braced himself for shouting. He had rehearsed his apologies on the long walk up from the apparition point. He had not prepared for Greaves to listen to the whole account in silence, hands folded, head slightly tilted, the way a heron listens to a stream, and then to say in a voice as level as a frozen pond, "Tell me about the corner." The corner, Mr. Greaves. The lorry came off the road on a corner. You said so. Which corner? Tell me about its shape. Dabbs told him about the corner. Greaves's house was the kind of house that made a man tell the truth, narrow and very tall, the staircase winding up past landing after landing of locked doors, and on every wall in cases of glass and brass were things, a jar in which something pale uncoiled when the light changed, a drawer of teeth, each one labeled. A cloak that drank the candlelight near it so the air around it looked thinner. Corvin Greaves dealt in the rare, the regulated, and the forbidden, and he had made a great deal of money by understanding one principle perfectly, that the law decided what could not be owned, and that the things that could not be owned were the only things worth selling. The egg had been the prize of his life. He had taken it out of a collapsed hoard vault in the Carpathians, off the body of a smuggler who had himself stolen it from a place older than smuggling, and he had known the moment he saw it, the black shell, the slow red turning under it, the cold that came off it like the cold off deep water, that it was not on any register, not of any breed, not a thing the ministry's lists had ever named. He had a buyer. He had 3 buyers. He had packed the egg in a crate of false reptile eggs to confuse the trace, loaded it onto an ordinary lorry to move it the last unwatched mile through Muggle Surrey, where no wizard would think to look, and the lorry had come off the road on a corner in the rain, and the crates had spilled into the dark. And when Dabbs's men had gathered them up, they had counted them twice, and the count had been right and the count had been wrong, because one of the false eggs had been replaced, somewhere in the scramble. An ordinary garden stone, and the prize of Corvin Greaves's life was gone. It rolled, Greaves said. Sir, you dropped a heavy round object in the dark on a hill in the rain. It rolled. He rose from his chair. He was a tall man, very thin, with gray hair combed back hard from a high pale forehead and eyes the color of weak tea, and when he stood, Dabbs took a step back without deciding to. It did not vanish. It is not in the hands of my competitors, or I would have heard them laughing by now. It is not in a Muggle skip, or the skip would have melted. It rolled downhill into a hedge, into a drain, into a garden, and it is sitting somewhere within a quarter-mile of that corner, warm and patient, exactly as it has sat for 200 years. He crossed to the window. Below, the unmapped street went about its evening lamplighters and shadows. Or, he said, it has hatched. Dabbs made a small noise. They wake to need, Greaves said, almost to himself. It is the one thing the old texts agree on, cold and patient for an age, and then some creature comes close enough, once hard enough, and the thing answers. A fox in a hard winter, a dog, a child. He turned the word over and seemed to find it interesting. There are children all along that road. I noticed them on the survey. Identical houses, identical gardens, and a child in every other one. He came back from the window, and the weak eyes settled on Dabbs and did not blink. I want the route of that lorry, I want the gradient of that hill. I want a map of every drain and every garden into which a round, heavy object could roll, and I want it keyed to where children sleep. I am not angry, Dabbs. Anger is for men who have lost a thing forever. I have merely mislaid it. He smiled, and the smile did not reach the weak eyes, and Dabbs would dream about it for a week. And I am very, very good at finding what I have mislaid. He sat back down and folded his hands and tilted his head, the heron over the stream. Eggs do not disappear, said Corvin Greaves. They roll downhill, find me the bottom of the hill. Harry made it to the third night before he had a plan, and the plan had 3 parts, and he kept them in his head in a row because there was nowhere safe to write them down. The first part was food, because Ember was hungry and growing, and half a slice of bread was a joke. He worked it the way he worked everything, by watching where the system lacked. The Dursleys threw away a great deal of food. Aunt Petunia scraped half of Dudley's enormous plate into the bin every night because Dudley was a child who liked the idea of food more than the eating of it. The bin was Harry's job. If Harry was clever about the scraping, food went from Dudley's plate into the bin, and from the bin into Harry's sock, and from Harry's sock in the dark into a creature who ate it from his fingers with that delicate, careful greed, and pressed her head under his chin afterward in a way that was, Harry decided, the closest thing to thank you that existed. The second part was heat, and this was the part that frightened him a little in the back of his mind. Ember ran hot. Asleep against his side, she was a hot water bottle. Awake and excited, she was an oven, and twice already he had woken to the smell of singeing and pressed his hand flat to her, hard, willing her cool, and she had cooled, the heat drawing back into her like a tide going out. He did not understand it. He understood only that it worked, that some part of her fire answered some part of him, and that he had a saucer of scorched floorboard now that he would have to keep hidden under the jumper for as long as he lived in this house. The third part was the hardest, and it was the part that made him a different kind of person, because the third part was the lie. Not one lie. A whole architecture of them, a building of lies he would have to live inside, every room of it load-bearing. He could not act happier because a happier Harry would be noticed. He could not act sadder because that would be noticed too. He had to be exactly the Harry the Dursleys expected, the flat-voiced, dawdling, sullen disappointment of a boy, while inside him a thread ran warm to a sleeping dragon, and a whole second life unfolded in the dark. He had to remember every second of every day that one wrong sound, one wrong look, one moment of letting the warmth in his chest show on his face, and it was over. He found to his surprise that he was good at it. He had been practicing his whole life, he realized. Every day in this house had been a rehearsal for keeping a secret, only the secret had been small before, that he was hungry, that the cupboard was cold, that he hated them, and now the secret was the size of his whole heart. The skills were the same, give them the face they expect. Make your wanting small and put it behind your ribs and sit on the lid. He had been doing it for years to survive. Now he did it to protect the one thing worth surviving for, and the doing of it stopped being a wound and became almost a kind of power. On the third night, with Ember fed and cool and folded warm against his side, Harry lay awake in the dark and let himself, for 1 minute, feel how frightened he ought to be. The list was long. He was 6, he had no money and no allies and no door that locked from his side. He was hiding a creature that grew visibly larger every day in a house run by people who would destroy her on sight, in a world full of he did not know what, men in vans, the they who took things, whoever had packed her in a crate and lost her on a hill. Somewhere out there, he was almost certain, someone was already looking. He felt all of that for 1 minute deliberately, as you press a bruise to know how bad it is. Then he put his hand on the warm black side rising and falling against him, and felt the thread in his chest pull tight and sure, and the fear did the thing it had done the first night. It went out and left purpose in its place. Let them look, Harry whispered to the dark. They're not having you. Down the thread, deep in a dream of a sky she had never seen, the creature the world did not know existed turned toward the warmth of him and was glad. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Hidden Bond. By the time the leaves came down on Privet Drive, Ember was too big for the cupboard, and Harry had become an architect of secrets. She had doubled and doubled again. The cat-sized hatchling of October was, by the first frost, the size of a large dog when she stretched out full, neck low, wings half-furled, tail trailing past the broken vacuum cleaner to the door, and a creature that size could not be hidden under a grown-out jumper, could not press flat into a corner while Aunt Petunia ran her disgusted eyes over the dark. Harry had lain awake doing the arithmetic for 3 nights running, and the arithmetic had come out the same each time, cold and clear. The cupboard was finished. He needed a bigger room than the only room he had. He needed somewhere no one ever went. He found it on a Sunday, while Uncle Vernon watched the snooker and Dudley ate his way through a tin of biscuits and Aunt Petunia clipped the front hedge into the shape she liked, which was no shape at all. Harry was sent to fetch the secateurs from the garden shed, and the garden shed was the answer, and he knew it the moment the door swung open on its rusted hinge. It was Uncle Vernon's shed in the way that the moon belonged to England, a thing he claimed and never visited. He had bought it the summer he decided he would take up woodworking, and he had taken up woodworking for one weekend, and the shed had been a tomb of good intentions ever since. A lathe under a sheet, a bench gone gray with dust, tins of screws fused into solid rust, the dim brown light of a single grimed window. Nobody had opened the door in 2 years but Harry, sent to fetch things. There was a padlock, and Harry knew where the key hung, and Harry had been picking the locks of his own life since he was 4. He stood in the doorway and felt the size of it, and down the thread in his chest Ember felt it too, second-hand, a wash of space and dust and old wood, and her interest sharpened to a point. Mine, said the wordless want. Ours, Harry breathed, if we're careful, if we're so careful. That was the night the work truly began, and the work had rules, and Harry made the rules the way a general makes a campaign, sitting in the dark with his knees up and Ember's chin on his foot, laying it out piece by piece while she listened to the iron under his voice. The first rule was the route. Ember could not be seen crossing the lawn, so she would not cross the lawn. The cupboard backed onto the understairs space, and the understairs space Harry discovered with a torch and a patient hour, backed onto the cavity wall that ran the length of the kitchen to the back door, and from the back door it was 9 feet of shadow under the kitchen window to the lee of the shed. 9 feet. At night, in the dead hour after Uncle Vernon's snore steadied and before the milk float came, 9 feet of shadow was a continent a careful creature could cross. The second rule was the hours. Ember was nocturnal now by treaty. She slept folded small through the long, bright, dangerous day and woke when the house slept, and the two of them had the dark together, which suited them both because the dark had always been Harry's country and it turned out to be hers. The third rule was the fire, and the fire was the hardest because the fire was the thing that could not be hidden if it ever once got loose. It was while solving the fire that Harry learned what folding truly was. He had seen the edge of it already, the day Petunia opened the cupboard and Ember drew herself small as a fist, the nights she pressed herself thin to fit a corner, and he had thought it only a clever trick of a flexible body, a cat going liquid to fit a box. It was not. He understood that on the night the shed nearly burned down, she had been excited. He had brought her the first real meat she had ever had, a whole chicken carcass lifted from the bin after Sunday lunch, more food in one place than she had seen in her short life, and the joy of it ran up the thread and lit her, and the lighting of her lit the air, and before Harry could move the dust on the workbench caught, a soft blue tongue of flame running along the grain like spilled spirit. Harry lunged. He got his hand flat to her flank and shoved everything he had down the thread, cool, down, in, stop, and Ember did a thing he had not known she could do. She pulled the fire back into herself, and she pulled her size in with it. He watched it happen by the light of the dying flame. The dog-sized dragon drew inward, not crushing herself small the way she pressed into a corner, but condensing, as steam condenses to a bead of water, her mass gathering, her edges drawing tight, the heat that had filled the shed rushing back down her throat as though the furnace had been capped, until what stood on the workbench was the size of a hawk, dense and dark and quiet, the ember gold veins banked to a sullen glow. The dust flame guttered and went out for want of the heat that had fed it. The shed was dark and cold and safe. And Ember, hawksmall, looked up at him with the stars in her gold eyes, trembling a little with the effort, and Harry understood at last that she was not a creature of meat that happened to be flexible. She was fire that had agreed to wear a body, and she could decide how much body to wear. He sat down hard on the dusty floor. She climbed into his lap, hawk-sized and heavy as a paving stone, far heavier than a hawk had any right to be, and he held her and felt the effort of the fold shaking in her like a struck bell, and he thought, with the part of him that never stopped working, this changes everything. Because a dog-sized dragon could not be hidden forever. But a creature that could be the size of a hawk when it chose, that could be carried, smuggled, tucked under a coat, walked past a teacher, sat in a cupboard with a jumper over it and passed for nothing at all, that creature could be hidden for years. The fold cost her, he could feel that it cost her, the tremor of it, the way she slept like the dead afterward, but it could be done. And anything that could be done, Harry could build a plan around. "You clever, clever thing," he whispered into the warm dark of her, and down the thread came the bloom of her pleasure, simple and total, the pleasure of a child who has been told she is good for the first time. "You wonderful, clever thing, do you know what we can do now? Do you have any idea what we can do?" They practiced the fold the way other children practiced the piano. It had rules, and Harry learned them by watching the cost. Small was expensive and could not be held forever. She could be hawk-sized for hours, but not for days, and the longer she held it, the harder she slept after. Large was free. She would unfold to her true growing size the moment she relaxed, as a held breath lets go, which meant the danger was always the same danger, the danger of relaxing at the wrong moment, of joy or fear jolting her open in a place where open could not be allowed. So they practiced control. They practiced holding small through a startle. Harry would clap his hands without warning, drop a tin, and Ember learned to take the jolt and stay folded, to swallow the flinch instead of unfolding into it, and every time she managed it, the thread sang with her pride, and Harry told her she was clever until the word lost its shape. By midwinter she could hold hawk size for a school day. By spring she could do it through a fright. And Harry Potter, 7 years old, walked to school every morning with a folded dragon asleep in the lining of his coat where he had cut a pocket the size of a loaf of bread, and no one in the world knew, and the secret had stopped being a thing that might be discovered any minute and started being a thing that could last. The food was the next thing to solve, and Ember solved it herself. Ben Scraps had kept her alive, but a dragon doubling every few weeks could not be raised on the leavings of Dudley's plate, and Harry had been lying awake over the arithmetic of it. He could steal only so much before the steady disappearance of food became its own clue. When the answer walked past the grimed window on 4 legs, and Ember went rigid in his lap with the stars gone bright and sharp. A cat. The number 7 tabby, fat and complacent, out on its nightly rounds. Not the cat, Harry said hard down the thread, because a vanished neighborhood cat was exactly the kind of small wrongness that started people looking, but the want she had shown him was not really about the cat. It was about the hunting. It was about the dark beyond the gardens, the long unwatched country of hedge and ditch, and the scrubby wood behind the industrial units where the foxes denned and the rats ran fat along the canal, a whole night larder that no one counted and no one missed. So he taught her the rules of the hunt the way he taught her everything, by drawing the map of danger first. Never a pet, never anything with a collar, anything that would be looked for, anything close enough to the houses to be heard, never leave a kill where the morning would find it. Range out past the last streetlight, into the country that belonged to no one, and take only what the dark would not miss, the rats, the rabbits, the foxes that the farmers shot anyway, and be back, folded and fed and silent, before the milk flowed. The first night she hunted alone, he nearly came out of his skin with the fear of it, sitting in the shed staring at the dark, feeling her go out across the gardens and over the wall and away until the thread ran thin and long between them, thinner than it had ever been, a hair stretched to its limit. And then he never forgot the first time. The thread did not just carry her fear or her hunger back to him. It carried the hunt. For 3 stolen seconds, crouched in a dusty shed in Surrey, Harry Potter was running low through wet grass under a sky he could suddenly see, the cold air pouring past, the world gone strange and bright in a way that was not light at all but heat, the warm shape of a rabbit blazing like a lamp against the cold dark of the earth, and then the lunge, the snap, the hot copper rush of it, and the fierce clean joy of a thing doing the one thing it was built to do. He came back to himself shaking in the dark, his heart slamming, his mouth flooded with a taste that was not his. He had been inside her, he had seen through her, he had not known it was possible, and the part of him that never stopped working sat up very straight in the dark and understood that the bond was not a leash and a feeling but a door, and that the door swung both ways, and that he had only just found the handle. She came back before the milk float, fed and content, the food problem solved for good, and curled into him smelling of cold grass and copper, and Harry lay awake long after with the new knowledge turning over and over in him. He could see through her eyes. Whatever else came, whatever the years brought, he would never be only a boy in a cupboard again. He had a second pair of eyes that flew, and a country of the dark that the daylight world knew nothing about, and the beginnings of an idea still shapeless that the thing growing between them was bigger than hiding, bigger than survival, bigger than anything the Dursleys' small, bright world had a word for. That was when the shed stopped being a hiding place and started being a home. He could not have said when it changed. There was no single night. But somewhere in that long secret winter, the work of hiding a dragon turned into the work of living with one, and the difference was everything. He brought her things, a square of carpet rescued from a skip for her to lie on instead of the cold boards, a cracked mirror because she liked her own gold eyes. Books, once he understood she liked his voice and that reading aloud in the dark fed something in her that meat did not. He read her the cereal box, the back of the bleach bottle, and then, when he grew bolder, the books he stole one at a time from the school library and returned before they were missed, whole worlds smuggled into a garden shed 9 feet across a strip of shadow. He read her dragons once from a book of myths, and she had listened with her head tilted and then made the sound deep in her throat that he had learned meant something close to laughter, as if to say, "They got it all wrong, didn't they? They got every word of it wrong." The cold stopped touching him that winter. He noticed it the way you notice a sound that has stopped, the absence of a thing that had been there all his life. The cupboard had been cold every winter he could remember, and he had shivered through them, and now he did not shiver. He would walk out across the frosted lawn in the dead hour in nothing but his thin pajamas and feel the frost crunch under his bare feet and feel nothing else, no bite, no ache, only a far-off awareness that the air was cold the way you are aware that a window is open in another room. He held his hand over the shed's one rusted radiator pipe, gone stone cold for years, and felt warmth come off his own palm. He said nothing about it to anyone because there was no one to say it to, but he understood, in the wordless way he understood most true things now, that the fire was getting into him. That you could not sleep every night against a banked furnace, could not run 3 seconds at a time through a dragon's blood and a dragon's hunger and stay entirely a boy. Something was passing along the thread the other way. He did not know yet how much. He only knew he was warm now all the time from the inside, and that the warmth was hers, and that he would not have given it back for anything in the world. He had never had a home. He understood that, sitting on the square of skip carpet with a dragon's warm weight across his knees and a stolen book open in the dim brown light, he had had a cupboard, which was a place he was kept. The shed was a place he chose to be, with someone who chose to be there with him, and that the choosing on both sides every night was the whole of what a home turned out to mean. The Dursleys had a house with 4 bedrooms and a lounge and a dining room and a kitchen with a window box. Harry had 9 feet of shadow and a tomb of rusted tools, and the only family that had ever wanted him, and he would not have traded. He did not let himself feel it more than once. Feeling it more than once was dangerous. The way pressing a bruise too often was dangerous. You could make yourself soft, and soft got you caught. He felt it once clean, on a night in February with the frost on the grimed window and Ember breathing slow against his ribs, and then he put it behind his ribs with everything else and got back to the work, because the work never stopped, and somewhere out past the dark a man was drawing maps. The first time Ember nearly killed someone, Harry was the one who stopped her. It was April, and Dudley's gang had been bored for a week, and aboard Dudley turned, as reliably as a compass needle, toward the cousin he was allowed to hunt. They caught Harry on the long way home, the way that went past the building site and the dead playground and the high blind back of the industrial units where no grown-up ever looked. 5 of them. Piers, Palkus and Dennis and Malcolm and Gordon and Dudley in the front, and they had a length of orange water pipe Dudley liked to swing, and Harry knew the shape of the next 10 minutes the way he knew the cracks in the cupboard wall. He had Ember in his coat. That was the thing his mind seized on, even as Dudley's fist took him in the stomach and folded him down onto the gravel, not the pain, which he knew, but the danger, which was new. Because down the thread, the instant Dudley's fist landed, something woke in Ember that Harry had never felt before. The warmth that was always there went out like a snuffed candle, and something else came up in its place, something with no warmth in it at all, something old and flat and patient and absolutely certain, and it uncoiled toward the boy who had struck its person with an intent that Harry felt in his own teeth. She was going to kill Dudley, not bite him, not frighten him. She had measured him in half a heartbeat, soft throat, slow body, no defense, and decided, with the cold arithmetic of a thing built for exactly this, that the simplest solution to the problem of Dudley was to remove Dudley from the world, and she was already moving, already swelling against the seam of his coat, the fold beginning to let go. "No," Harry said. He said it out loud, which was a mistake, because Piers laughed and asked who he was talking to. But he said it down the thread at the same time, with everything he had, as he had said cool and down and stop on the night of the dust fire, and he wrapped the no around the cold thing rising in her, and he held. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. The cold thing did not want to be held. It loved him, that was the terrible part. He understood even in the gravel and the laughing that her cold and her warmth were the same thing seen from 2 sides, that she would kill Dudley because she loved Harry, that the love and the killing were one act in her, and she could not see why he would stop her. "Mine," the thread said, fierce and flat, "hurt you, remove." And Harry, doubled over a stranger's fist with blood in his mouth, had to make her understand a thing she had no room in her for, that he would rather take the beating than let her be seen, that being seen was a worse death than this, that he was asking her, begging her to let him be hurt to keep her safe. She did not understand it, but she obeyed it. That was the bond, that was the whole shape of what they were to each other. She did not have to understand. She only had to trust that the thing he wanted was right because he was the one who wanted it, and she trusted that more than she trusted her own certainty, and so the cold thing stopped, shaking, a half-inch from letting loose, and held. She gave him one thing, though. He felt her take it. As Dudley wound up the orange pipe for the swing that Harry knew from experience would crack a rib, a gust of wind came out of the warm April afternoon, a single hard gust, hot as an opened oven, smelling of iron and lightning, and snatched the pipe sideways out of Dudley's hands and sent it skittering across the gravel 10 feet away. Just that, a trick of the wind. Dudley stared at his empty hands. Piers stopped laughing. And into the small, uncertain silence, Harry got his feet under him and ran, low and fast and unpredictable, and they were too rattled to chase. And he made it to the shed with 3 bruised ribs and a split lip and a dragon vibrating against his chest with thwarted murder, and he was, underneath the pain, exhilarated past anything he had words for, because he had learned 2 things, and both of them mattered. The first was that Ember would kill for him, not might. Would instantly, without hesitation or remorse, the moment she judged him truly threatened, and that her judgment was a cold and rapid and lethal thing that did not care about consequences or witnesses or the careful architecture of secrets Harry had spent 6 months building. She loved him with a fire that would burn the world to keep him, and the fire did not think about tomorrow. The second was that he could hold her. That the leash was real, that it ran both ways, that when he said no down the thread with his whole, well, she would stop even a half-inch from the kill. He was the one who thought about tomorrow. He was the one who would decide when the cold thing was allowed off its leash, and he understood, sitting in the dim shed pressing a cold tin to his split lip, while Ember licked the blood from his knuckles with a tongue like warm leather, that this was the most important responsibility of his life and that he would never, ever be careless with it. Not for that, he told her when the cold had finally gone out of the thread and the warmth had come back, frightened now, sorry in the wordless way, anxious that she had done wrong. He put his forehead against hers. Not for Dudley. Dudley's not worth being seen for. You hear me? When it matters, when it really matters, I'll tell you. I'll let you off, but you don't get to decide. Not because you're not clever, because you can't see far enough yet. That's my job, looking far. You trust me to look far, and I'll trust you to be the fire. All right, mine, said the thread, subdued, and then after a moment with the whole weight of her behind it, yes, he had a partner now, not a pet. He had not realized until that night that there was a difference. He sat with her until the bruised ribs stopped being the loudest thing in him, and then he limped in to make the supper and gave the grown-ups the flat, dead face, and said he had fallen off a wall, and Uncle Vernon said serve him right, and nobody in the bright, clean house had the first idea that the boy doing the washing up could have watched their son die that afternoon and had chosen instead to blade. The man came to Privet Drive in May, and Harry was 40 feet away when it happened and never knew. Corvin Greaves had spent the winter doing what he had told Dabbs he would do, which was to find the bottom of the hill, and the hill had given up its secrets slowly and then all at once. The lorry's route he had bought from a frightened clerk. The gradient he had walked himself at 3 a.m, a tall, thin gray man in a long coat pacing a Surrey hill with an instrument in his hand that ticked when it neared the place where something very old had recently been very warm. Instrument had ticked hardest in a particular flower bed under a particular front window of a particular identical house, and then, and this was the part that had made Greaves stand very still in the dark for a long time, it had ticked faintly in a trail leading away from the flower bed, in through a side gate, toward a cupboard, toward a shed, fading and renewing, the spoor of a warm thing carried by a smaller warm thing, back and forth, night after night. A child, he had thought, looking at the dark house. There is a child in there carrying it back and forth, extraordinary. The thing imprinted and the imprint held, and the child has been feeding it all winter under their very noses. He had felt, standing in the Surrey dark, the nearest thing to admiration his cold heart still produced. And then he had felt the other thing, the better thing, the thing that had made him rich, appetite. Because an egg was worth a fortune, and a living hatchling of an unrecorded line was worth 10 fortunes, and a living hatchling already broken to a rider's hand, already tame, already trained, that was not a price. That was a thing without a price, a thing collectors would ruin themselves to own, and it was sitting in a garden shed in Surrey being fed bin scraps by a child who did not know what he had. He came in daylight because daylight was where the watchers were not. He came in a brown suit with a clipboard and a manner, and he knocked on the door of number 4 with a soft gloved hand. And when the thin horse-faced woman opened it, he gave her a smile and a name that was not his and a story about a lost reptile, an escaped exotic, a neighbor's python gone missing in the warm spell, harmless really, ma'am. But the children, you understand, one does worry, had she seen anything unusual, anything in the garden, the shed perhaps. Petunia Dursley looked at the man on her doorstep with the contempt she kept for door-to-door anything, and the special revulsion she kept for the word unusual, which was a word that lived in her house only attached to her nephew, and she said that there was nothing unusual at number 4 Privet Drive, nothing whatsoever, that they were a perfectly normal family and always had been, thank you, and she did not keep snakes, and neither did anyone she would admit to knowing, and she shut the door in his face. Greaves stood on the step a moment, reading the slammed door as he read everything. She's not lying about the snake, he thought, she does not know. Whatever is in that shed, the woman of the house has no idea it is there, which means it is very well hidden indeed, which means the child is cleverer than I assumed, which means he turned and walked back down the path, unhurried, a man with all the time in the world, which means I cannot simply take it. Not from a warded family, not in daylight, not from a child who has hidden a dragon from his own household for a winter. I will need the law or I will need patience, and patience has never failed me yet. He paused at the gate and looked back at the shed, just visible past the side of the house, an ugly brown box in an ugly green garden, and he smiled his smile that did not reach his eyes. Hello, he said softly, to the shed, to the thing inside it, to the child he had not seen. There you are. Then he was gone, and the street was ordinary again, and 40 feet away in the dim brown light Harry Potter read aloud from a stolen library book to a dragon the size of a large dog, and felt for one moment a wash of cold come down the thread from nowhere, a prickle on the back of his neck like a draft from an open door, and Ember lifted her head and stared at the wall toward the front of the house, the stars gone hard and flat in her gold eyes, a low sound starting in her throat. What is it? Harry whispered, his hand going to her flank, his whole skin gone to goose flesh. Ember, what's wrong? But the cold had already passed, the street was quiet, the draft had closed. Whatever had been at the edge of the thread was gone, and after a long moment Ember lowered her head back to his knee, though the stars in her eyes did not soften for a long time, and Harry sat in the home they had built and could not have said why his heart was suddenly pounding, or why he reached over and slid the bolt on the inside of the shed door, though it had never once kept anyone out. He told himself it was nothing. He was getting better at lying. He was even sometimes getting good enough to fool himself. But that night he did not sleep in the cupboard. He carried his blanket out across the 9 feet of shadow and slept in the shed with his arms around a dragon, and Ember kept her eyes open toward the dark for a long time after the boy's breathing slowed, watching the place where the cold thing had been, learning the smell of it, folding the memory of it down somewhere deep where she kept the things she would one day need to kill. The secret was holding. But it was no longer a secret only Harry kept. Out past the dark, a patient man had its scent now, and a name for the thing he meant to own, and all the time in the world. The winter had taught Harry how to hide. The spring had taught him what his dragon would do to keep him. The years ahead would teach him the rest, that the world he had been born into was wider and stranger and more dangerous than a garden shed, that there were laws made to destroy the thing he loved and men made to profit from it, and that the day was coming, sure as the turning year, when 9 feet of shadow would not be enough and the fire would have to be seen. But that was the years ahead. For now there was the shed and the dim brown light and the stolen book and the warm, impossible weight of the only family he had ever chosen, and Harry Potter, who had been given nothing, had built himself a home out of shadow and stubbornness and refused with everything in him to let the world take it. For now that was enough. For now it would have to be. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Dragon Touched 3 years taught Harry Potter that he was no longer entirely a boy, and the lesson came in pieces, the way the most important lessons do. Ember had grown the way weather grows. By the spring he turned 8, she was the size of a pony when she stretched out full, and the shed could no longer hold her unfolded. She lived hawksmall through the day now by necessity, not treaty, and unfurled to her true size only out in the country of the dark, past the last streetlight, where Harry had learned to lead her along the canal and into the scrubby wood and up onto the bare back of the down where no light reached and no eye watched. They had a routine for it, worn smooth by repetition. The dead hour, the 9 feet of shadow, the wall, the wood, and then the great quiet unfolding under the stars when she let go of small and became, for a few hours, the thing she actually was. And Harry's part of the bond had been growing too, quietly the whole time, like the fire getting into him that first winter, only now it was not just warmth. Now it had hands. The first deliberate flame came on a night in the wood when he was 8.5. He had been watching her make fire for 2 years, the small held tongues she could conjure and snuff at will, and he had put his hand in her fire 100 times and never been burned, and on this night, crouched by the cold ring of stones where they sometimes sat, he held out his own empty palm and wanted, the old wanting, the deep place wanting that had floated a wig and woken an egg but shaped now aimed as she shaped hers, and a flame stood up out of his bare skin. It was small. It was the size of a candle, red at the root and ember gold in the body and dark blue at the tip, and it was hers unmistakably, the same fire that lived in her veins, and it burned on Harry's palm and did not consume his hand and did not consume the air and stopped exactly where he told it to stop. He stared at it. Down the thread came a flood of feeling from Ember that was not surprise. She had never doubted it would come, but a deep, satisfied recognition, the feeling of a parent watching a child take its first step toward a place the parent has always known the child would reach. There, said the thread, yours, I told you, we are the same. He laughed, the silent, helpless laugh, and closed his hand, and the flame went out without smoke, and he understood that the door between them swung both ways in more than vision. Her fire was his to call. Whatever made her was, in some smaller measure, in him now too, fed along the thread night after night, year after year, until it had taken root in a place behind his ribs, 2 inches left of his breastbone, and grown. After the flame, the rest came faster, because once he knew to look for it, he found it everywhere. He could not be burned. He had half known it since the cupboard, but he tested it now deliberately, as he tested everything, held his hand over the gas ring in the kitchen until the blue cones licked his palm and felt only that far-off awareness of heat, the way he felt the cold, a fact about the world that did not reach him. He pressed his fingers to the iron Aunt Petunia left standing and lifted them away unmarked. He learned to be careful about it, because a boy who did not flinch from a hot pan was a boy who got looked at, and so he flinched on purpose, performed the small jerk and the small cry, built it into the architecture of lies, but he knew, and the knowing was a quiet power he carried under the flat, dead face. He could feel heat the way other people felt light. This was the strangest of the gifts and the slowest to come, and it frightened him a little at first because it would not switch off. He would be sitting in the cold classroom and become aware of the warm shapes of the other children blazing softly around him, 28 small lamps of life burning against the cold dark of the desks and the walls, brightest at the throat and the wrists where the blood ran near the skin. He could feel the teacher cross to the window without looking up. He could feel, through the wall, whether the next classroom was full or empty. He could feel a cat in a hedge from 20 feet, a bird in a roof, a person coming round a corner before the corner showed them. It was Ember's sense, the hunting sense, the one that had shown him a rabbit blazing like a lamp in the wet grass, and it had grown in him until it was always on, a second way of knowing the world that ran underneath his eyes, and he learned to live with it as you learn to live with a sound you cannot stop hearing, by ceasing mostly to notice it, while never being without it. The trouble was that it leaked. He had not understood at first that being dragon-touched showed. He thought of the gifts as things he did, things he could switch on and hide. But the warmth that lived in him now was not a thing he did. It was a thing he was, and it bled off him into the world whether he willed it or not, and the world, slow and incurious as it was, began to notice. It was Mr. Pruett who nearly undid him, a tired, kind man who taught the top class and felt the cold in his joints and kept the radiators turned up high. He noticed over a term that the corner where the Potter boy sat was always the warm corner, that the children fought to sit near it in January, that the window there never fogged, that a cup of water left on that sill in the morning was warm by lunch. He said it out loud one gray afternoon, half to himself, rubbing his bad knee. Funny, always toasty over by you, Potter, you're like a little stove. The whole class looked. Harry felt the looking the way he felt heat now, a sudden blaze of 28 curious attentions all turning toward the one thing he could not afford to have looked at, and the old cold clarity came down over him like a visor. He did not deny it because denial invited investigation. He grinned the sheepish grin he had built for exactly this kind of moment and said, "It's the pipe, sir. There's a hot pipe runs up the wall behind me. You can feel it if you put your hand on the plaster." There was no hot pipe. But he had spent a year laying this particular lie, had actually loosened the plaster and run a length of old copper up behind the radiator the summer before, against precisely this day, because Harry Potter prepared for the worst, and the worst was always some small ordinary moment when a kind tired man said a true thing out loud. Mr. Pruett put his hand on the warm plaster and felt the warm copper behind it and said, "Ah, there you are," satisfied, and the 28 attentions turned away, and the danger closed like a draft, and Harry sat in his warm corner with his heart going hard and learned the lesson under the lesson. That he could not stop the heat from leaking, so he would have to spend the rest of his life building ordinary explanations for it, a lifetime of hot pipes and sunny windows and clumsy stories, an architecture of the mundane raised against a truth that would burn the world down if it ever got out. He went home and dampened himself on purpose after that, learned to pull the warmth in, the way Ember pulled in her sighs, to bank his own fire down to something a cold classroom could not feel. It cost him the way folding cost her. He slept harder on the nights he held it banked all day. But he learned to do it, and by the time he was 10 the warm corner was just a corner, and Mr. Pruett's knees ached as they always had, and no one thought the Potter boy was anything but a quiet odd child who told dull lies and kept to himself. And the door swung both ways for the eyes too fully now, not just 3 stolen seconds. He learned to ride behind Ember's vision the way a man learns to ride a horse, clumsily at first, thrown off by the strangeness of it, the world rendered in heat instead of color, the dizzy wrongness of seeing his own small shape blazing below him on the dark down while his body sat blind and slack against a cold stone. Then better, then easily. The first clear night he flew with her at full height he did not come back to himself for an hour, and when he did he was weeping, and he could not have said why. She had taken him up off the down in a long climbing spiral, the cold air pouring over wings that were not his, the muscles of her great chest working under a sense that was not his to own and owned him anyway. Surrey fell away beneath them into the dark, and the dark was not dark. He saw the world as she saw it, in heat instead of light, and the world was a hearth. The towns lay scattered below like coals raked across black velvet, each warm window its own small fire. The motorway was a slow, bright river of moving lamps. The foxes burned in the hedgerows, and the owls burned along the wood edge, and the late lone walkers burned on the pavements. Every living thing aflame held up against the cold of the turning earth, and over all of it the cold, clean dark went up, and in the dark, very high, the stars burned too, and Harry understood, riding behind a dragon's eyes at the top of a Surrey sky, that the stars were the same fire. That whatever lived in Ember and had taken root in him was not a strange thing or a wrong thing or a freak thing. It was the oldest thing. It was the thing the stars were made of, the thing the world was warmed by, the fire that remembered older skies, and it had chosen, out of all the cold and the dark, to come and live in a cupboard with a boy who had been told he was nothing. He came back to his body shaking on the cold stone with Ember's great head curled over him, the stars in her eyes and the stars in the sky and the stars in him, and he did not have words for it and did not try to find them. Some things you felt once clean and then put behind your ribs and carried. He carried that one a long way. He made one rule out of it because he made a rule out of everything. He never flew unless Ember's body was curled around his, so that her cold, lethal half stood guard over his empty shell while the rest of her carried his sight aloft. The fire kept watch over the boy. The boy rode the fire, and between them they were never in those years truly undefended, though the years were teaching Harry slowly and then quickly that the world had reasons to want them undefended and was patient about finding them. The Dursleys came closest to the shed the summer he was 9, and it was Dudley, of course, because Dudley had a nose for the things Harry loved. He had grown suspicious in the dull animal way of a boy who senses his cousin has something and resents not knowing what. Harry vanished at night. Harry was less afraid than he used to be. Harry, lately, smiled at nothing. Dudley did not reason this out. Dudley did not reason, but he felt the wrongness of it, and one hot July evening, bored and mean, he announced at the table that he'd seen Harry sneaking into Dad's shed, and that Harry probably had stuff hidden in there, and that he was going to go and look. Harry's whole body went to ice over his plate. Ember was in the shed. Pony-sized, unfolded for the heat, asleep in the long bright evening because the day had been quiet, and 40 feet away through two walls Harry felt her, felt the precise warm bulk of her against the cold sense that was always on, and felt her come awake the instant the word shed crossed Dudley's lips, felt the cold thing stir. He could not say no fast enough down the thread and also keep his face dead at the table. So he did the thing he had been training for 3 years to do. He split himself. He gave the table the flat board face and the flat board voice. There's nothing in the shed, it's full of spiders, you'll get filthy, knowing Dudley. Knowing that the surest way to make Dudley do a thing was to tell him not to, but knowing too that Dudley was lazy and frightened of spiders, and that the words filthy and spiders did real work, and at the same time, behind his ribs, he poured everything down the thread to Ember. Fold now small as you can into the lathe housing behind the sheet, and stay, whatever he does, whatever he sees, you do not move, you do not light, you trust me. She folded. He felt her do it, felt the pony-sized furnace draw down and down into a thing the size of a cat, and wedge herself into the cold iron dark behind the shrouded lathe, banking her veins to nothing, holding her own breath, every line of her screaming to unfold and meet the threat and end it, and holding, because he had asked her to, because the leash ran both ways and he had told her to trust him to look far. Dudley went to the shed. Harry went with him, casual, hands in pockets, because letting Dudley go alone was unthinkable. Dudley rattled the padlock. Harry had locked it. Harry always locked it, and Harry produced bored indifference and said the key was lost years ago, and anyway it was Dad's, and Dad would do his nut if Dudley broke the lock. And Dudley, who was indeed afraid of his father's temper in the particular matter of Dad's things, stood in the hot evening peering through the grimed window into a brown dimness full of dust and shrouded shapes and saw nothing, because the one shape that mattered had made itself nothing, and lost interest, because Dudley always lost interest. And went back inside to the television. Harry stood at the window a moment longer, and through the glass and the dust and the cold sense he felt the small wedged furnace of her, holding, and he laid his palm flat on the warm glass and sent down the thread the only thing there was to send, which was, good, you were so good, it's over, come out now. And he felt the fold let go, felt her flow back up to her true size in the safe brown dark, and felt her come to the inside of the door and press against it. And he wanted more than anything in the world to go in and put his arms around her, and he could not because Dudley might look out, and so he only stood with his palm on the glass, and she pressed her great head to the glass on the other side, the boy and the dragon and a pane of dirty glass between them, and that was the night Harry understood. Fully and finally that the shed was running out of time, that a thing the size of a pony could be hidden from a lazy boy with a story about spiders exactly once, that the next time, and there would be a next time, the story would not be enough. He started planning that night for the day there would be no shed at all. The wood took the rest of his childhood's safety, and it took it in October when Harry was 9, and Ember was out hunting the far edge of the scrub while Harry sat against their cold stone with his sight riding loose behind her eyes, half dreaming. He felt her find the rabbit warren under the bramble. He felt her settle to the patient stillness of the stalk, and then they both felt at the same instant, the wrongness. There was a thing in the dark that was cold where cold should not be, a straight hard line of it across the run she was about to take, a line that smelled of iron and oil and crushed grass and man. Ember froze. Harry, a quarter-mile away in his body, came bolt upright with his heart slamming because he knew that smell now, knew it from the day a draft of it had come down the thread while a stranger stood at the front of the house, the cold, patient smell of being hunted. A snare. He saw it through her eyes as she lowered her great head to it, a noose of bright wire staked into the earth across the rabbit run, set low and mean, and beyond it, further into the dark, more of them, a whole line of them strung across the wood, and the warm shape of a man asleep in a parked van at the wood's edge, and beside the van, awake, a dog. The dog had her scent before Harry could pull her back. It came off its chain in a black blur, a long, fast lurcher built for exactly this, for running down the things that men set snares for, and it was not afraid of her because it had never in its short, brutal life met a thing to be afraid of, and it went for her throat. Harry felt the cold thing wake in her, the old flat, patient certainty, and this time he did not say no. It was over before the dog understood it had made a mistake. Ember did not breathe fire. Fire in the dry October would have lit a beacon visible for miles. And even with the cold thing on her she would not break that rule. The rule was deeper in her than instinct now, 3 years deep. She simply turned, faster than a pony-sized thing had any right to turn, and met the lurcher in the air, and there was a single short sound, and then there was no dog. Only a stillness and a dark wet shape on the leaves and a dragon standing over it with the stars gone flat in her eyes, breathing slow, already listening for the man. No, Harry sent then, hard on his feet now and running through the wood toward her with branches whipping his face. The man's asleep. Leave the man. Come away now. She did not want to. He felt how much she did not want to. The man had set the cold iron lines. The man's dog had come for her. The man was the source, and the simplest solution was to remove the source. But he flooded the thread with the old argument, the only argument that had ever held her. Not worth being seen for. Trust me to look far. Come away. And she came. She left the man asleep in his van, and the snares standing in the run, and the dead dog on the leaves. And she came to Harry in the dark, hawksmall now, folded down and shaking, and he caught her against his chest and held her and felt the cold go out of her and the fear come up in its place. Her fear, the new fear, the fear that had no name in a creature 3 years old. The understanding that the dark country was not theirs after all, that other things hunted it, that the world was full of cold iron lines set low and mean for the catching of warm living things. I know, Harry whispered into her, walking fast and quiet back toward the streetlights with his heart still slamming. I know, I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry. He took the lesson home and lay awake on it, and the lesson was this: someone was setting traps in their wood. Not for them, maybe the snares were rabbit snares, the man a small mean poacher of the ordinary kind, but it did not matter whether the iron had been meant for them. The point was that the dark was not empty and not safe and not theirs, that there were men in vans at the edge of every wood, that a thing could be walking the country it had always walked and put a foot wrong and be caught. After the wood, he hardened everything. New rules. They never used the same wood twice running. He flew the ground ahead of her before she ran it, every time, looking for the cold, straight lines that did not belong. He started that winter to think seriously and coldly about a thing he had been pushing to the edge of his mind for years, that he and Ember could not stay children in a garden shed forever, that she was the size of a pony and would not stop growing, that the day was coming when 9 feet of shadow and a folded body would not be enough, and that when it came he had better not meet it unprepared. He did not know yet what was coming. But he had started to feel its shape, the way he felt a person coming round a corner before they showed. The shape had a name, and the name was drawing closer, and its name was Corvin Greaves. Greaves had been patient, and patience had done what patience did. In the 3 years since he had stood at the gate of number 4 and said, "There you are," to a shed, he had not knocked again, had not been seen, had not put a foot wrong. He had simply built his case the way a man builds a wall, one cold fact at a time. He had the manifest at last, the full freight record of the lost lorry, bought through 4 hands so it could never be traced back to him, and on it, in the careful muggle hand of a clerk who had no idea what he had written, the route and the date in the corner. He had the date keyed now to a thing he had spent a year and a great deal of money assembling, every scrap of small, strange rumor that had drifted out of Little Winging in the autumn of 1986. There was not much. Muggles forgot, and the wizarding watchers on that street, he knew there were watchers. An old, powerful protection lay over the place like a held breath, and he was far too clever to test it, reported only on the boy, never on the boy's shed. But there was one rumor, and it was enough. A primary school teacher, retired now, had told a story for years at her bridge club about a peculiar evening when a child's wig had floated, and a peculiar morning soon after when a gardener 2 streets over had found his compost heap burned to white ash from the inside with no flame and no cause. The autumn the Potter boy was 6. A freak fire. People said freak fire when they meant a thing they had no word for. Greaves had a word for it, and he had the instrument. He had commissioned it himself from a maker in Prague who did not ask questions, and it had cost him the price of a small house. A thing of black glass and slow brass that could be keyed to the particular residue and egg of that line left behind when it woke, the cold print of a 200-year dormancy breaking, a signature as unique as a face. He had keyed it to the flower bed at number 4, where the print was strongest, and now, anywhere in Britain, the instrument would warm in his hand when it came within a mile of the thing that had left that print. He had what he needed. He had the town, the year, the house, and a hound that would never lose the scent. What he did not have was a way in. The protection over Privet Drive was old and deep and not his to break, and he was not a man who broke himself against walls. He had watched and learned over 3 patient years the rhythm of the boy's life, the school, the shed, the careful invisible routine, and he had concluded 2 things. The first was that the boy would leave. Children of that house went to a particular school at 11, the great warded school in the north, and the warded school was a wall too, but it was a wall with 1,000 doors and 10,000 students, and 100 ways for a patient man to reach inside it without ever breaking the stone. The second was that the law was a key that opened any door if you knew which official to put it in the hand of. He sat in his tall, thin house on the night Harry came home shaking from the wood, though the two had never met and never spoken, and he turned the black glass instrument over in his long fingers and felt it sit cold and quiet, because the thing it hunted was 100 miles south and folded small in a boy's arms. Soon, he thought, 2 more years and the boy goes north into a school I can reach. He turned the instrument and thought about the men he knew at the ministry, the cold, lawful men whose mandate was the seizure and destruction of illegally held dragons. and how a single anonymous word in the right ear could turn the whole machinery of the law into a battering ram aimed exactly where he wanted it aimed, to drive the thing out of hiding and into the open, where the law would try to destroy it, and where a patient man with the right cage and the right buyer could be waiting to catch what the law flushed. 2 years, he said softly to the cold instrument, to the empty room. I have waited longer for less. 100 miles south, in a garden shed, Harry Potter sat through the small hours with his arms around a folded dragon, and made a decision that he did not yet have the information to understand, but made anyway, because his whole life had taught him to plan for the worst, and the worst had just shown him its hand in a wood full of cold iron. He was going to stop thinking of being found as a thing that might happen. He was going to start thinking of it as a thing that would happen, on a day he could not yet name, and he was going to spend whatever years he had left before that day getting ready for it, getting stronger, getting cleverer, learning everything there was to learn about the world that had laws against the thing he loved and men who hunted it, so that when the day came he would not be a frightened child in a shed, but a thing the world had to reckon with. They're going to find us, he told her in the dark, and it was not a fear anymore. It was a fact laid down cold and clear like all his best decisions. One day, I can feel it, so we're going to be ready. We're going to be so ready that when they come, it won't matter that they found us. You understand? I'm not going to spend the rest of my life hoping nobody looks in the shed. I'm going to make us into something nobody can take. Down the thread, the warmth wrapped around the iron in his voice, and underneath the warmth, banked and patient and growing, the cold lethal thing she kept for the world stirred and agreed. She was the size of a pony now. She would be the size of a house one day. He could feel the promise of it in her, the way you feel the size of a storm still out at sea. And the boy who held her was not entirely a boy anymore. He was warm from the inside all the time. He could call her fire onto his own bare skin. He could feel the living heat of the world through walls and fly the dark behind a dragon's eyes, and he was learning, year by careful year, to be exactly what he had told her he would make them. Something nobody could take. The wood had cold iron in it now, and a patient man 100 miles north had a hound that would never lose the scent, and the day was coming when 9 feet of shadow would not be enough. But Harry Potter had stopped being afraid of that day. He had started instead to get ready for it. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The first letter came on a Tuesday, and it was addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, and Harry knew, before he had finished reading the front of it, that the world he had been getting ready for had finally come to find him. He had been getting ready for 5 years. He was 11 now, narrow and quiet and warm from the inside, with green eyes that gave nothing away and a folded dragon asleep against his ribs even at the breakfast table, because he no longer let her out of arm's reach when the air felt like change, and the air had felt like change for a week. He had felt it the way he felt a person coming round a corner. Now the corner had a letter in it, written in emerald ink on heavy yellow parchment by someone who knew exactly which cupboard he slept in, and down the thread Ember came awake all at once, the stars in her hidden eyes going sharp. Uncle Vernon took the letter off him before he could open it, and went the color of old porridge, and that was the beginning of the siege. Harry watched it unfold with the cold, clear attention he gave to everything that mattered, and what he learned from it was more useful than anything in the letters he was never allowed to read. He learned that the letters frightened Uncle Vernon, and that Uncle Vernon was not a man who frightened. He learned that Aunt Petunia knew what they were, that she had gone white and tight-lipped and would not say the word, and that the not saying was the loudest thing she had ever done. He learned, when the letters came by the dozen and then the 100, hissing through the gaps round the door and spilling down the chimney and bursting out of the eggs at breakfast, that whoever was sending them did not give up, and that this was a kind of power he had only ever met in himself, and in the patient cold thing he could feel waiting somewhere out past the dark. He let Vernon flee. That surprised the Dursleys, who expected him to fight to stay, but Harry had no wish to stay and every wish to see where the road went, and so he sat quiet in the back of the car with a folded dragon warm against his side while Vernon drove them in a great mad circle round the country, fleeing the parchment, until at last he ran them out to the end of everything, a black rock in a grey sea, a half-rotted hut, a storm coming down like the lid of a pot. He thinks distance and salt water will stop it, Harry murmured to Ember in the dark of the hut that night, the Dursleys snoring, the rain hammering the roof, the sea heaving below. He doesn't understand. You can't run from a thing that wants you that badly. I should know. We've been wanted that badly for 5 years. Down the thread came her agreement, flat and certain, and under it a low readiness, because she had felt the change in the air too, and a dragon does not meet change unready. The door came off its hinges at midnight, and the largest man Harry had ever seen ducked through it out of the storm, and Harry's whole careful world tipped on its edge. Hagrid filled the hut the way weather filled the down. He was vast and wild and dripping, with a beard like a thornbush and eyes like black beetles, and he carried an umbrella and a damp parcel that turned out to be a birthday cake, and he looked at Harry across the ruined room with a warmth so total and so undefended that Harry, who had spent 5 years giving the world a flat, dead face, felt the face crack a little before he could stop it. Nobody had ever looked at Harry like that, nobody human. He had thought only a dragon could. "Ye don know what ye are," Hagrid said, when Vernon's bluster had run out and the truth had come down like the storm, and Harry sat very still and let the giant tell him. That his parents had not died in a car crash, that they had been a witch and a wizard, that they had been murdered by a dark wizard whose name people would not say, that Harry himself was a wizard, famous, expected, that there was a whole world hidden inside the one he knew, with a government and a bank and a school in the north that had been sending him a letter a day for a week. Harry took it in the way he took everything, fast, cold, sorting. Most of it he had half guessed. He had known he was not ordinary since the wig and the egg. He had known magic was real because it lived in his own hands. The only true surprise was the scale of it, that there was a whole world of people like him, organized, governed, lawed. And the moment Hagrid said the word lawed, said that there were rules, that there was a ministry, that there were things even wizards were not allowed to do or keep or be, a part of Harry that had been asleep since the wood came awake and started, very quietly, to take notes. Because if there were laws, then there was a law about dragons. And if there was a law about dragons, he needed to know exactly what it was before anyone in this new world got close enough to feel the warm weight folded against his ribs. It very nearly happened that night. Hagrid loved dragons. Harry learned it within the hour because Hagrid could not stop talking about the things he loved, and somewhere between the cake and the storm he got onto the subject of the creatures he'd raised and longed to raise, his great beetle eyes going soft and wet, and he said the word dragon the way other men said the name of a woman they had loved and lost. "Great creatures on the face o' the earth," Hagrid rumbled, gazing into the fire he'd lit in the cold grate with a tap of his pink umbrella. "Misunderstood, see. People hear dragon and they think monster. But I tell ya, Harry, if you ever got close to one, really close, raised one from the egg, there's nothing like it, nothing in the world." And against Harry's ribs, folded small and silent, Ember stirred. He felt it happen before he could stop it, felt the word egg and the word raised, and the great soft loving voice reach down the thread and touch something in her, felt her recognition, her sudden fierce interest in this enormous warm man who spoke of her kind as the greatest creatures on the earth. She wanted, for one unguarded instant, to be seen by him, to be known. After 5 years of being the secret, here was a voice that called her beautiful, and a creature 3 years old does not have 5 years of discipline, and Harry felt the fold begin to loosen. No. He sent it down the thread harder than he had sent anything since the day Dudley nearly died. No, not him, not even him. Stay small, stay secret, trust me. He kept his face turned to the fire, kept the flat attention, asked Hagrid an easy question to keep the great voice rolling, and under his ribs he held his dragon folded against the first temptation she had ever truly felt to be known, held her as he had held her over Dudley, by being the one who looked far, by trusting that the warmth would obey the will even when the will hurt. She held. But it was close, closer than the snare, closer than Dudley, and Harry understood a new danger as he sat by Hagrid's fire, that the deadliest threat to the secret was not the men who hated dragons. It was the one man in the world who would love her because love was the one thing that could make her want to come out. He would have to be careful of Hagrid, careful of kindness. It was the hardest kind of careful there was. Diagon Alley taught him the law, and the law was worse than he had feared. He went with Hagrid the next morning into a London he had walked past all his life without seeing, through a grubby pub that ordinary eyes slid over, through a wall that folded open like a hand, into a crooked golden street that should not have fit behind a pub and did, crammed with cauldrons and owls and robes and the smell of the new world. Harry walked it with his sight wide and his heat sense wider, cataloging, because a thing the size of this had to have edges and rules and dangers, and he meant to learn them all before he trusted any of it with what he carried. He learned about the bank and the vault his parents had left him, and the small, heavy fortune that meant he need never again do arithmetic over a slice of bread. He learned about wands in a dusty narrow shop where a pale man named Ollivander watched him with pale eyes and sold him a wand of holly and phoenix feather. And Harry, holding it, felt the warmth in his own chest lean toward it and recognize it, fire calling to fire, the phoenix in the wood answering the dragon in the boy. And Ollivander said, curious, so softly, in a way that made Harry resolve never to come back to that shop 1 inch more than he had to. He learned in the menagerie the thing he had needed most to know, how wizards' senses worked and where their edges lay. He stood among the cages of toads and cats and owls and let his heat sense range over the witch behind the counter, testing her, and found that she could not feel what he felt, that wizards read magic with spells and instruments and not with the skin, that a folded dragon banked to nothing and held against a boy's ribs gave off no signature a wand could catch unless someone already suspected it was there and went looking. The wards felt presences and intentions, not warmth. The teachers would feel a spell cast, a curse, a flare of the unusual, but a thing that simply existed, quiet and small and giving nothing off, would pass beneath all of it, because the whole vast apparatus of wizard detection was built to catch magic being done, and Ember, folded and silent, was not doing magic. She was only being a fire that had agreed to wear a very small body, and there was no instrument in that golden street built to find such a thing, because no one in the golden street believed such a thing could exist. And he learned the dragon law, and it was in the bookshop that he learned it, while Hagrid was off buying him an owl Harry had not asked for, and could not refuse without seeming strange. He found the law in a fat book called Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and then in a fatter one behind it, a dry ministry volume of statutes, and he read it standing very still in a corner of the shop with his heart going slow and cold. Dragons were classed XXXXX, the highest, the wizard killer class, the things the law did not permit any person to own, breed, conceal, or keep, the ban on experimental breeding, the seizure provisions. And the penalty, written in the dry, dead language of statute, plain as a slammed door. Any dragon found in private keeping was to be confiscated by the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures and destroyed, and the keeper prosecuted. Not relocated, not registered, destroyed. He had known it would be bad. He had not let himself imagine the word destroyed in print in law in the dry, certain voice of a whole government, applied to the warm, folded weight against his ribs. He stood in the bookshop and felt the cold come up in him, the cold he had learned from her, the flat, patient cold, and underneath the cold, for one moment, a grief so total that the warmth in his chest dimmed, and down the thread Ember felt it and pressed closer, frightened by a fear in him she could not see the shape of. It's all right, he told her, though it was not. I'm not going to let it happen. I just had to know. Now I know. He read on cold and methodical, looking for the thing that always existed in any system if you read far enough, the exception, the edge case, the seam. And he found in the fat book and in a footnote of the dry one a thing that made him stand even stiller. There were 10 registered breeds of dragon in Britain and the world, 10 and no more, each described, each classed, each named, and he had read every description 3 times looking for her, and she was not there, not one of them. Not the blackened ember, not the fire that did not throw shadows, not the folding, not the eyes with stars in them. Whatever ember was, the law had no name for it, because the men who wrote the law had never seen it, because her line was older than the registry, and the registry did not know it had ever lived. She's not on the list, he thought, and the thought was the first warm thing since the word destroyed. They have a law for dragons, but they do not have a law for her because they do not know she exists. And a law cannot destroy a thing it has never named. It was thin, it was very thin. But Harry Potter had built whole years on thinner, and he folded the knowledge away with care, and walked out of the bookshop into the golden street with a wand in his pocket and a fortune in the bank, and a plan beginning to take shape behind his green eyes, the plan he had told her he would build 5 years ago in a garden shed. The plan to make them into something nobody could take. He gamed Hogwarts out on the long ride home, while Hagrid dozed and the train carried them south, and by the time the sea came into view, he had decided the thing that everyone who knew the truth would later call madness. He was going to take her to the school. It was on its face insane to walk a dragon, a class XXXXX wizard killer, an illegal and forbidden thing, into the most heavily warded building in magical Britain, full of teachers who could feel magic and a headmaster who, by all accounts, missed nothing. But Harry had learned to distrust the face of things, and underneath the face the arithmetic was clear, and it ran like this. The shed was finished, Dudley had nearly found her, and the next time the story about spiders would not hold, and a pony-sized dragon could not be hidden in a suburban garden through the years of his growing and hers. He had to keep her near. The bond would not survive long separation, and neither, he suspected, would he. They were 2 halves of one fire now, and you did not store half a fire in a shed and carry the other half 100 miles north. So she came with him, or he did not go. And once he had accepted that she came with him, the school stopped looking like the worst place to hide her and started looking like the best. Because the wards that would feel her were the same wards that masked everyone. A castle full of magic ran hot to his heat sense, a great blazing pile of enchantment and 1,000 warm bodies, and one more banked fire folded small in a dormitory would be a candle in a furnace. Because there was a forest, Hagrid had pointed it out, the great dark forbidden forest at the foot of the castle, full of things the wizards feared, exactly the country of the dark where a creature could unfold and hunt and fly unseen. And because of the deepest principle Harry had, the one that had kept her hidden for 5 years and would keep her hidden now, nobody finds a thing they are not looking for. No one in that castle would so much as imagine that a first-year boy had walked through the front doors with a dragon under his coat, and a thing no one imagines is a thing no one looks for, and a thing no one looks for is, in the only sense that mattered, invisible. The shed had been the worst place to hide a dragon, and he had hidden her there for 5 years by being careful. The castle was a better place. He would simply have to be more careful, and Harry Potter had never in his life been anything else. 100 miles south, in the days after Harry left it, Privet Drive received another visitor, and this one did not knock. Corvin Greaves had felt the boy go. The black glass instrument in his tall, thin house had warmed for 5 years to a cold, steady print 100 miles south. And then, on the 1st of September, the print had moved north fast, on a line that ran straight to the warded school he had always known the boy would enter. And Greaves had set the instrument down and smiled his smile that did not reach his eyes, because the waiting was over and the work could begin. He came to number 4 when he was sure it was empty, walked its garden in the gray morning, stood at last in the open door of an ugly brown shed and breathed in. The print was everywhere here, soaked into the carpet square, the cracked mirror, the scorched boards, and reading it as he read everything, Greaves built the whole secret history of the place from its residue. Here it had slept, here it had been fed. Here, for 5 years, a child had raised a thing the world believed extinct and trained it and loved it, and the love was in the residue too, in the place where the boy had held it undefended, and Greaves looked at that and understood the one fact that turned a fortune into a thing without a price. The dragon was bonded, imprinted, broken to a single hand. It would not be a wild thing he had to cage and break. It would come if he could find the lever, already gentle, already trained, the rarest and most valuable creature in the world. He could not follow it onto warded ground, so he would do what he had always meant to do. He would use the law as a battering ram, and he would be standing behind the door when it broke. The office of Saul Brearley was on the 2nd floor of the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, and it was a cold, clean, orderly place, because Saul Brearley was a cold, clean, orderly man. He had spent 20 years enforcing the ban, and in 20 years he had confiscated and destroyed 11 illegally held dragons, and he did not enjoy it and he did not regret it, because the law was the law and the law existed because a dragon in private hands was a fire that would, sooner or later, get loose and kill, and Brearley had seen what was left after such a fire once early in his career and had never needed to see it again. He was not a cruel man. He was something more dangerous than cruel. He was lawful and immovable and entirely without doubt. The letter on his desk was anonymous, which he disliked, and specific, which interested him. It cited a date, autumn 1986. It cited a place, Little Winging, Surrey. It cited a freak fire, a burned compost heap, a child's wig, and it suggested, in cold, careful prose, that a dragon of an unrecorded and especially dangerous kind had been hatched and concealed by a child who was now a student at Hogwarts School, and that the law, if it had any meaning at all, required that the matter be investigated and the creature, if found, destroyed. Brearley read it twice. Then he opened a fresh file and wrote a name across the top of it, and the name was Potter H., and he began with the slow, immovable patience of the law itself to assemble a case. He did not know he was Greaves's instrument. He would have been appalled to learn it, but it did not matter whether he knew. The law did not care who pointed it, only where, and it had been pointed now, straight at a first-year boy, and the secret folded against his ribs. Harry met Ron Weasley on the train, and that was the day he first imagined letting another person in. He had not planned it. He had planned solitude, a quiet corner, a closed compartment, 11 years of practice at giving nothing away. But the red-haired boy who asked to share his compartment was warm in a way Harry's heat sense liked. A steady, undefended warmth with no cold in it anywhere, no calculation, no hunting, and he talked about his family and his hand-me-down robes and his fear of being nobody at a school full of somebodies. And Harry, who had been nobody his whole life and was about to be a famous somebody he had never agreed to be, found that he liked him. Found more dangerously that he trusted him, not all the way, not with the secret, not yet, but with the first small ordinary truths Harry had never once handed another living person, and the handing of them was so strange and so good that he had to be careful not to hand over too much at once. Down the thread, folded warm against his ribs, Ember took the measure of the red-haired boy in her own way, the measure she took of everything, for warmth or for cold, for threat or for not, and after a while Harry felt her decision come up, simple and final, not a threat, yours if you want him. And Harry, who had spent 5 years with exactly one person in the world he could trust, sat in the rattling train watching the country go north and let himself imagine, for one careful minute, a day when the circle of 2 might become a circle of 3. The castle rose out of the dark across a black lake, 1,000 windows burning, a great blazing pile of enchantment that lit up Harry's heat sense like a city on fire, and folded small against his ribs, where no ward would ever find one more banked flame in all that brightness. Ember woke fully and looked out through the seam of his coat with the stars in her hidden eyes, and Harry felt her see it, the school, the forest, the lake, the whole new country of the dark and the bright, and felt her understand. As he understood that they had walked the secret straight into the heart of the world that had a law to destroy it. Almost there, he murmured, too low for anyone to hear, his hand pressed flat over the warm weight at his side as the boat slid toward the castle. Stay small, stay secret. We've done this for 5 years. We can do it here. Down the thread came her answer, warm and certain and unafraid, the same answer she had given him in a cupboard when he was 6. Yes, he had not planned for the hat. It came at him out of nowhere in the great roaring hall, a ragged ancient thing on a stool, and a stern witch reading names, and the slow terrible understanding, as the first children sat and the brim opened and spoke, that the sorting was not a ceremony but a reading, that the hat went into your head and looked. Harry stood in the line with his heat sense screaming and ran the arithmetic faster than he had ever run it. A thing that looked into minds would look into his. And folded against his ribs, 2 inches left of his breastbone, was a thread that ran warm to a dragon, and at the other end of that thread lived a second mind, and Harry did not know, could not know, whether the hat would feel it. There was no plan for this. There was only the thing he had spent 5 years learning to do, which was to control what could be controlled and hide the rest behind the rest. When the witch called Potter, Harry in the hall hushed and hissed his name. He walked to the stool and sat and let the hat come down over his eyes, and in the half-second before it touched him, he did the thing he did at the breakfast table and in the cold classroom and over Dudley's bleeding face. He reached down the thread and pulled. Down, deep, small, behind everything. He took the bright warm presence of Ember and he banked her, pulled her down into the deepest folded dark he could make, the place a furnace goes when it is only embers, and he wrapped his own mind around her like a hand around a candle flame in the wind, and he held. Well, well, said a small voice in his ear, and Harry's blood went to ice. Difficult, very difficult, plenty of courage, I see, not a bad mind either, and a thirst to prove yourself, oh yes, but what is this? The voice paused, and Harry felt it turn, felt it lean toward the banked dark behind his ribs the way a man leans toward a sound at the edge of hearing. There's something warm, something down very deep, something that does not want to be looked at, and a wool around it like a wall. My, you are good at walls, aren't you, Harry Potter? You have been building them a long time. Don't, Harry thought at it, with everything he had, not begging, commanding the way he commanded the fire. There's nothing there, leave it. Sort me anywhere, leave it. The hat was silent for a long moment, and in that moment Harry understood that it had felt her, that an enchantment 1,000 years old had brushed the edge of a thing the law said could not exist, and the registry had never named, and he waited, cold and ready, for the world to end. No, the hat said at last, slowly, almost gently, and Harry could not tell whether it was answering him or deciding something on its own. No, I don't think I'll look there. Some fires are not mine to disturb, and some secrets a boy carries because they are his to carry, and it is not the place of an old hat to spill them on the floor of a hall. You are loyal past sense and brave past wisdom, and you will need to be both, I think, before the year is out. So it had better be Gryffindor, the hall roared. Harry walked to the cheering red and gold table on legs that did not quite belong to him, and sat, and let himself shake for exactly one breath, and then put it away, because a thing that had felt her and chosen silence was a thing he did not understand and could not control, and the only safe response to that was to be more careful, not less. Down the thread in the banked dark, Ember uncoiled by a fraction, frightened, and Harry sent her the warmth that meant safe, held mine, well done, and felt her settle. The first night in the dormitory was the night he built the new protocol, and he built it the way he built everything, by walking the ground and finding the seams. The dormitory was a round stone room high in a tower, 5 four-poster beds, hangings he could draw closed, a trunk at the foot of each. Ron had the next bed, already asleep and snoring before his head was down. The others, a sandy boy, a round forgetful one, a dark dreamy one, slept too, and Harry lay in the dark with his hangings drawn and a folded dragon warm against his chest, and felt out the shape of the place with his heat sense the way he had felt out the shed in the school. The walls were thick, the other boys slept like the dead. The hangings cut the line of sight. And out past the window, far below, the great dark forest breathed in the cold, full of warm hidden lives, the country of the dark he had promised her. He waited until the tower was wholly asleep, then he opened the window and let her out. She flowed out of small into her true size in the cold air on the sill, pony large, black against the stars, her wings unfurling for the first time in months to their full span, and Harry, leaning on the sill with the night wind in his face, felt her joy come down the thread like a struck chord, the joy of unfolding, of sky, of the forest waiting below. Hunt, he told her. Stay over the trees, away from the castle, away from the village, be back before the gray. And come if I call, if I ever call, you come, fold or no fold, ward or no ward, you come. And she pushed off the sill into the dark and dropped and caught the air and was gone over the black mass of the trees, a fire flying free for the first time in the heart of the world that would destroy her, and Harry stood at the window of his new life and watched her go and felt, under the fear, the old fierce joy, because they had done it. 5 years of careful, and they had walked the secret through the front doors and out the tower window into a forest made for her, and the castle slept and no one knew. He drew the protocol in his head before he slept, every line of it, the way a general draws a campaign. The window was the root, the forest was the range, the hangings and the banked fold were the cover, the thread was the leash. And the rule under all the rules, the one he had made in a cupboard at 6 and would never unmake, when it matters, when it really matters, he would call and she would come, and the world would learn what it had a law against and had never once seen. But not yet. For now there was the tower and the forest and the warm certainty flying free under the stars, and Harry Potter lay in a four-poster bed in the safest, dangerous place in the world and let himself feel, for one clean breath, that he had pulled off the impossible. Then he put it away and slept, and somewhere in the south a cold, patient man turned a black glass instrument toward the north, and a lawful man wrote a name at the top of a file, and the year that would change everything began. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Discovery Risk. For 2 months the protocol held, and Harry Potter began, against all his training, to be happy. It frightened him more than the danger did. Danger he understood, he had been managing it since he was 3. But happiness was a thing he had felt clean exactly twice in his life, the night of the hatching and the night at the tower window, and now it came at him in small, unguarded waves all day long, and each one was a crack in the wall, and a boy with cracks in his wall got caught. He had breakfast at a table where people saved him a seat. He had lessons that lit up the warm, calculating part of him like nothing ever had. He had Ron, who was loud and loyal and made him laugh before he remembered not to, and somewhere in those first 2 months the circle of 1 plus a dragon had quietly become a circle of 2 plus a dragon, and Harry had not decided to let it happen, which was exactly why it worried him. The castle was everything he had gamed it to be. His heat sense, which had screamed the first night, settled into the great blazing warmth of the place until it was only a comfort. 1,000 banked fires of 1,000 sleeping lives, the deep slow heat of old enchantment in the stones, and folded among it all undetectable, one more flame in his trunk by day and out the window by night. Ember hunted the forest and grew fat and strong on its hidden lives and came back before the gray every morning, and the wards never so much as twitched, because the wards were built to catch magic being done, and a dragon being a dragon in a forest full of worse things was the quietest thing in Scotland. The flying lesson was the only time the fire nearly slipped in daylight, and it taught him something about himself he had not known. He had never flown a broom. He had flown only behind a dragon's eyes, and when he kicked off the ground on Madame Hooch's command, something in him recognized the air the way it recognized fire, leaned into it, claimed it, and the broom answered him as Ember's wings answered her, and Harry rose and banked and stopped on a dropped remembrall 50 feet up in a sheer plummeting dive that should have killed an untrained first year and did not, because Harry Potter had spent 3 years learning in his bones how a body moved through the sky. He caught the glass ball a foot from the grass and pulled up clean, and the whole class stared, and Professor McGonagall came across the lawn at a near run with her lips white, and for one bad moment Harry felt the warmth in his chest flare with the joy of it, felt the fire want to come up into his hands, and had to slam it down hard, because a boy who flew like that was already going to be looked at, and a boy who flew like that with fire in his palms would be looked at by the wrong people. He let them make him a seeker, he let them think it was talent and luck. He never told anyone that the sky had felt like coming home because he had been flying it behind a dragon's eyes since he was 8. There was only one wrongness in the whole bright castle, and Harry felt it the first time he walked into the defense classroom, and it raised every hair on his body. The stammering, turbaned man at the front of the room, Quirrell, the timid one everyone pitied, was cold. Not cold like the dungeons were cold, not cold like the lake. Cold the way the snare in the wood had been cold, the way the draft down the thread had been cold the day a stranger stood at the front of the house. There was a warm man in those robes, a frightened, ordinary warmth, and there was, wrapped around him, through him, behind the back of his turbaned head, a second thing that gave off no heat at all, a patch of absolute cold where a living warmth should be, a hole in the world shaped like a person. Harry's heat sense had never met its like. It read every living thing as a fire, this read as the absence of fire, a thing that had been alive and was now something else, and it made the warmth behind Harry's own ribs shrink, and the cold, lethal thing he had learned from Ember stir and want to look away and want also to never turn its back. He did not understand it, and he did not investigate it, because he had exactly one secret to protect and could not afford a second mystery. But he marked it and he kept his distance, and down the thread Ember learned the cold-shaped hole as she had learned Greaves's print, folded the memory of it down deep where she kept the things she might one day need to kill. Whatever lived behind the turban, it was the second most dangerous thing in the castle. Harry intended to stay clear of both it and the most dangerous thing, which was discovery, for as long as the year would let him. The year let him until Halloween. Hermione Granger had not been part of the plan. She was a small, fierce girl with too much hand and too many right answers, and she had spent 2 months being magnificent and friendless in the way that only the cleverest and loneliest children manage, and Harry had recognized her without wanting to, recognized the wall she had built out of being right, as he had built his out of being invisible, and had done nothing about it, because doing something about it meant another person near the secret. Then Ron, being Ron, said something cruel about her after charms, loud, and Harry watched her hear it, and watched her wall crack, and watched her flee toward the bathrooms with her face crumpling, and he felt the old useless ache of a thing he could not fix and was not his job to fix, and he let her go. That was the mistake. He understood it the instant the troll came in. It came in at the feast, or the news of it did a mountain troll loose in the dungeons, screamed in by a white-faced squirrel who then fainted with what Harry's heat sense read, even across the roaring hall as a performance, and the hall erupted, and the prefects herded the houses toward the towers, and Harry, swept along in the red and gold crowd, did the arithmetic and went cold. Hermione is in the bathroom. Hermione does not know about the troll. He grabbed Ron's sleeve and they peeled off from the herd into the empty corridors, running against the tide of his own training, because some things you did not leave a person to, and a girl crying alone in a bathroom while a wizard killer roamed the halls was one of them. They found her and the troll found them, all in the same dreadful minute. It had wandered up out of the dungeons, 12 feet of gray muscle and stink, a club the size of a fence post dragging from one fist, and it had blundered into the very bathroom where Hermione knelt sobbing behind a row of sinks. And by the time Harry and Ron skidded through the door it had her cornered, and it was raising the club, and there was no time for a spell Harry barely knew, no time to think, no time for the careful architecture of 5 years. And Harry did the only thing there was to do. He called. He did not decide to. It came up out of the deep place the way the wanting had come up in the cupboard, the way the no had come up over Dudley, only this was neither, this was come, this was the rule under all the rules, the one he had made at 6 and never unmade. When it matters, when it really matters, you come, fold or no fold, ward or no ward, you come. He flung it down the thread with his whole soul as the club came down toward Hermione's skull, and 100 feet up and away a dragon dropped out of the night sky toward a tower window, and Harry felt her coming like a struck bell, and he threw himself between the club and the girl with his bare hand up and open, and full of every scrap of fire he had ever learned to call. The fire that answered was not his. It came down the thread ahead of her, a torrent of it, more than he had ever held, and it poured out of his open palm not as a candle flame but as a wall, a sheet of red and ember fire that did not throw shadows, that stood up between the girl and the club and caught the descending blow and held it, the wood of the club bursting into white flame where it met the wall, the troll bellowing and staggering back from a heat that should not exist in the hand of a first-year boy. Ron was screaming. Hermione had gone utterly silent, and then the window at the end of the bathroom corridor exploded inward in a spray of glass and stone, and Ember came through it. She was not folded. She had unfolded in the air on the way down, the thing Harry had told her never to do where she might be seen, because he had called and the call overrode every rule, and she came through the ruined window at her full pony and more size with her wings filling the corridor and the stars gone flat and lethal in her gold eyes, and she landed between Harry and the troll, and she was the most beautiful and most terrible thing any of the 3 children had ever seen. Troll, which had never in its dim brutal life met a thing to fear, met one now. Ember did not roar. She lowered her head and looked at it, and the ember gold veins under her black scales ran bright, and the corridor filled with the smell of hot iron and lightning, and the cold lethal arithmetic that Harry had spent 5 years holding on its leash came off the leash all at once, because Harry had called and Harry was threatened, and the simplest solution to the troll was the solution she had always known. She was going to burn it to nothing. Harry felt her gather to it, felt the furnace open, felt the fire that could char a chicken carcass to ash in a shed gather itself into a thing that could turn 12 feet of troll into a smear of grease on the stone, and he understood in the same instant the cost. Fire like that in a stone corridor on Halloween night with the whole castle 100 feet up and listening. They would feel it. They would all feel it. The careful, invisible years would end in one breath of flame. Not fire, Harry said out loud and down the thread both at once, the way he had learned over Dudley. Ember, not fire, end it, but not fire, quiet. And his dragon, who could have ended the troll in a single breath and wanted to, who had every instinct in her screaming to open the furnace and be done, held the fire, swallowed it, and killed the troll the other way, the way she had killed the lurcher in the wood, the quiet way, the way without light. She moved faster than a thing her size could move, under the troll's flailing arm and up, and there was a single short sound, and the troll's bellow stopped, and 12 feet of gray muscle came down dead on the bathroom tiles, and the corridor was suddenly, ringingly silent and full of the smell of iron, and lit only by the banking glow of a dragon's veins and the dying white flame of a troll's club. Ember turned from the body and went to Harry and pressed her great head against his chest, trembling, the fold tremor, the afterkill tremor, the relief of him alive, and Harry put both arms around her head, around a skull as long as his own torso, and held her, and for one moment forgot entirely that there was anyone else in the world. Then Hermione Granger said in a small, wrecked, steady voice from behind the sinks, "That's a dragon." He turned to them with the cold clarity coming down over him like a visor, already running the damage, already gaming the next hour. 2 witnesses, both 11, both shocked, the body, the broken window, the teachers surely coming, and he found to his surprise that the 2 faces looking at him and his dragon held no fear at all. Ron was white and shaking and grinning like a lunatic, and the first words out of him were not who or what or help, but hoarse and awed, "Harry, Harry. That's the most brilliant thing I've ever seen in my entire life." And Hermione, climbing to her feet, glass in her hair, tear tracks on her face, looked at the dead troll and the broken window and the dragon and the boy, and Harry watched the cleverest first year in the school assemble the whole shape of it in 3 seconds flat, and what she said was, "You called it. It came through a window from outside. It's been here the whole time. You've been hiding a dragon." And then fierce, before he could answer, "I won't tell. Whatever it is, whatever you've done, I owe you my life, and I won't tell. And neither will Ron, will you, Ron?" "Course not," said Ron, still grinning. "Are you mad? This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." There was no time to do anything with the gift they had just handed him. Footsteps were coming, fast, many. He made the only decision the minute allowed. He sent Ember up and out the broken window. "Fold, go, the forest, wait, I'm all right, I'll call," and felt her resist, and felt her go, because he had asked, and she was gone into the dark before the first teacher rounded the corner, and 3 first-years were left standing over a dead troll with a story they had 30 seconds to agree on. The story Hermione told when McGonagall and Snape and Quirrell burst in was a lie of such cool brilliance that Harry revised his entire estimate of her on the spot. She took the blame, said she'd gone looking for the troll, thinking she could handle it, that Harry and Ron had come to save her, that they'd shut it in the bathroom, and it had blundered into the broken window itself and fallen and broken its neck. It was nonsense. It was barely possible. But it was a boring nonsense, a nonsense that fit the children the teachers expected, and it gave them nothing to pull on, and Harry watched her tell it and understood that he had not gained 1 ally that night but 2, and that the clever one was going to be very dangerous indeed on his side. But Snape did not look at the window or the body or the story. Snape looked at Harry. The dark eyes went over him once, slow, and Harry felt the touch of something at the edge of his mind, a cold probing pressure like the hat's but meaner, and he slammed the wall up and gave the man the flat dead face, and Snape's lip curled and he said nothing, but Harry knew that look. It was the look of a man who has smelled smoke and not yet found the fire. Snape suspected something. Not the dragon, no one would imagine the dragon, but something, some wrongness about the Potter boy, and a man who suspected was a man who watched, and Harry added Severus Snape to the short, cold list of things he would have to manage. The next night the 3 of them went into the forest, and Harry let his friends meet his dragon properly, and that was the night the conspiracy of 3 was truly made. He took them out under the cover of dark with the map of teachers' patrols in his head, down past Hagrid's dark hut and over the fence into the trees, to the cold hollow where Ember waited. She came to them out of the dark, pony large, the Ember gold banked low, and Ron made a small sound and Hermione stood very straight and did not run, and Harry stood between them with a hand on the dragon's neck and felt her take their measure again, and felt her decide this time fully that the red-haired boy and the fierce clever girl were his, and therefore hers, and therefore to be guarded and not removed. She lowered her great head to Hermione first of all of them, as if she knew which one needed the most convincing, and Hermione, trembling, reached out one hand and laid it flat on a black-scaled cheek, and burst into tears and laughed, and Harry understood that he had not lost the secret. He had given it 3 keepers instead of 1. He told them everything that night in the cold hollow with Ember's warmth at their backs, the cupboard, the egg, the imprint, the folding, the fire in his own hands, the years of careful, the law with the word destroyed in it, the line that was not on any list. Hermione drank it down like water in a desert, and when he reached the end of it she did not say how frightening or how dangerous. She said, fierce and practical and already 3 steps ahead, "Then we have work to do. If they ever do come looking, a story won't be enough. We need real concealment, proper old wardcraft, the kind that hides a presence and not just a sound. I've read about it. I can learn it. There are books in the restricted section and I will find a way into them." And Ron said, "And I'll keep watch and run interference and lie to anyone about anything. I'm brilliant at that, ask my mum." And Harry, who had carried the weight alone for 5 years, felt it shift onto 3 pairs of shoulders, and felt the wall in his chest crack all the way through, and let it. Over the weeks that followed, the conspiracy of 3 turned the secret from a thing one boy guarded by instinct into a thing 3 children defended by design, and the change very nearly saved them before the winter was out. Hermione was as good as her word and better. She talked her way into the restricted section on a forged note in bad Latin and sheer nerve, and she came back with old wardcraft no first year had any business attempting. A concealment that did not hide a thing from eyes but from attention, a layered notice-me-not woven over Harry's trunk and the sill of the tower window, so that a teacher's gaze would slide off the spot where a folded dragon slept and find it simply not worth a second thought. It took her 3 weeks to make it hold. Harry, who could feel the warmth of the work settle over his trunk like a blanket, told her it was the best magic he had ever seen, and meant it, and watched her flush with a pride that had nothing of loneliness left in it. Ron's part was rougher and just as vital. He learned the patrol routes, the prefect's habits, the squeak in the 4th-floor stair. He could empty a corridor with a loud invented argument or fill a doorway with his own oblivious bulk at exactly the right moment. And on the night a suspicious filch followed the three of them halfway to the forest, it was Ron who peeled off, accidentally knocked a suit of armor down a flight of stairs 3 corridors away, and led the caretaker off on a furious half-hour chase while Harry and Hermione got Ember folded and the window concealed and themselves into bed with the hangings drawn. They were sitting up, hearts hammering, when Filch flung the dormitory door open and swept his lamp over 5 sleeping shapes and one trunk his eyes refused to settle on, and found nothing, because there was nothing to find that his attention would consent to see, and went away cursing. Harry lay in the dark afterward and understood that the thing he had built alone out of instinct and stubbornness was now a real defense, designed and tested, 3 minds and a dragon, and that for the first time in his life the secret was stronger for being shared, not weaker. Far above them all, in a circular office at the top of the school, an old man with a long silver beard had set down his quill the night of the troll and turned his head slowly toward the North Tower, as if listening to a sound that had stopped. Albus Dumbledore had felt the second fire in his castle since the 1st of September. He had not spoken of it. He had felt it the way one feels a draft in a familiar room, a warmth that did not belong, banked and hidden and moving with the Potter boy, slipping out the tower window in the dead hours and back before the gray. And he had known it for what it was within the week, because Albus Dumbledore had lived a very long time and read a very great deal, and there were perhaps 3 people alive who could have named the thing the boy carried, and he was one of them. He knew the law, he knew the word destroyed. And he had chosen for 2 months to say nothing and do nothing but watch, because the boy had clearly raised the creature from the egg, alone in secret against the whole weight of a cruel childhood, and a thing raised by such a love was not the wildfire the law had been written to guard against, and because Albus Dumbledore had made enough decisions for enough reasons to know that some fires are best left to burn where they choose, and watched and trusted. But the night of the troll the fire had flared. He had felt it from the top of the school, a flame in a corridor where no flame should be, gone almost before it bloomed, controlled, pulled back, a furnace opened and slammed shut by a will he recognized, because he had felt that will hold the hat at bay in September. The boy had nearly been forced to show his hand. The boy had held it barely. And Dumbledore understood that the year of quiet watching was ending, that the secret had begun to move, that things were converging on a child who did not know how many eyes were already turned his way. "Be careful, Harry," the old man said softly to the empty office. "You are cleverer than they know and braver, and you love a thing the world will try to take from you. I have seen how that story goes. Be careful." He did not know about Greaves. He did not know about Brearley's file. He knew only that a great and dangerous love was hidden in his castle, and that love and danger in his long experience were never far apart and never quiet for long. In the south, the convergence had already begun. Corvin Greaves had spent the autumn finishing what he had started in Brearley's office. The anonymous letter had opened the file. Now Greaves fed it patiently through 3 more hands so that none of it could ever lead back to him. A copy of a freight manifest slipped to a clerk, a retired teacher's bridge club story relayed by a friend of a friend, a forged note of a Surrey freak fire dated 1986. Each piece was true or near enough. Each piece, dropped into the cold, orderly machinery of Saul Brearley's certainty, turned the wheels another quarter turn. And by Halloween the file marked Potter. H had grown fat enough that Brearley did the thing the law required him to do when a case reached a certain weight. He requested, through the proper channels, authorization to investigate a suspected illegal dragon held by a student at Hogwarts School, and to enter the grounds, if granted, to search. The request would take time. The ministry moved slowly, and Hogwarts was not an easy door to open even for the law, and Dumbledore's name lay over the school like the old protection had lain over Privet Drive. But the request was filed, and the wheels were turning, and somewhere in the cold, clean machinery of magical Britain, a warrant began its slow paper march toward a tower where a first-year boy slept, more watched than he had ever been, and not yet aware of any of it. That night Harry lay in the dark with the hangings drawn and Ember folded warm against his chest, back from the forest, the afterkill tremor long gone, and he did not sleep for a long time. The circle was 3 now. The secret had teeth in the world it had never had before, 2 more mouths that could speak it, 2 more lives that could be made to pay for it. And under that fear, threaded through it, was a thing he had no practice feeling and did not know what to do with: relief. The relief of not being alone. The relief of a weight shared. He turned it over in the dark as he had turned over the first flame, half afraid, and found that it did not burn him. "We're not alone anymore," he murmured to her, too low to wake the room. "I don't know if that's good or terrible, probably both." Down the thread came her answer, warm and certain, untroubled by the arithmetic that kept him awake, because a dragon does not fear being known by the people her person trusts. She fears only losing him, and he was here, warm and alive in hers, and the troll was dead, and the night was quiet. But Ember did not sleep either. Long after the boy's breathing slowed, she lay with her gold eyes open in the dark, turned toward the south, toward the cold, patient print she had learned at a shed window 5 years ago and never forgotten, and toward a new cold, the cold of a thing without warmth that lived behind a turban 2 floors down, and she banked the memory of both of them down deep where she kept the things she would one day need to kill, and waited as fire waits for the wind that would set it free. December came down on the castle in snow, and the danger came down with it quietly, the way the worst things always came. The first Quidditch match nearly undid everything Hermione's wardcraft had bought them. Harry had never told anyone that the sky felt like home. He had meant to play it careful, to be merely good. But his broom turned rogue beneath him in the middle of the match, bucking, lurching, trying to throw him 80 feet onto the frozen pitch, and Harry's heat sense, even through the panic, found the source of it across the stadium. A knot of cold concentration in the staff stand, a wand line of malice aimed straight at him, coming from the direction of the turban and the cold-shaped hole behind it. The curse on the broom was someone's deliberate work. Enfolded warm in the Gryffindor stand against Hermione's side, where Harry had left her so he could fly, Ember woke to her person in mortal danger 80 feet up with nothing under him but air, and Harry felt the call rise in her, felt the fold begin to loosen in a stand packed with 200 screaming witnesses. No, he threw down the thread, clinging to the shuddering broom with both hands. Not here. Hold. I'll hold the broom, you hold the fold, trust me. And she held barely, shaking against Hermione, who had her arms locked around the folded dragon and her eyes locked on the staff stand, muttering the counterjinx she'd read about, while Ron set fire to the hem of a teacher's robe 3 rows down to break the cursecaster's concentration. Between a girl's clever spell and a boy's clumsy arson and a dragon's terrible held discipline, the broom steadied, and Harry caught the snitch in his mouth in a 60-foot dive and landed alive, and the stadium roared, and only 4 beings in it knew how close the whole secret had come to ending in fire above a crowd. That night in the cold hollow, the 3 of them did not celebrate. They sat with Ember and were quiet because they had all felt the same thing. The danger had stopped being passive. The troll had been chance, the broom had been aimed. Something in the castle wanted Harry Potter dead, and a Harry Potter in mortal danger was a Harry Potter whose dragon would not stay folded forever, no matter how iron his will or how clever Hermione's wards. The leash held only as long as Harry lived to hold it. They understood, sitting in the snow with a dragon's warmth at their backs, that the year had set a clock running, and that none of them knew how much time was left on it. Far to the south, the clock had a face, and the face was smiling. Corvin Greaves had grown tired of waiting on the slow machinery of the law. Brearley's warrant crawled through the ministry at the pace of all warrants, and Greaves was a patient man but not an idle one, and so he had begun that December to prepare for the day the law would flush his prize into the open, because the law he knew would try to destroy the dragon, and a destroyed dragon was worth nothing, and a dragon fleeing a ministry seizure team across open country was worth everything to a man waiting with the right net. He took a long lease on a cottage in the hills above Hogsmeade under a name that was not his, a gray thin antiquarian come north for the winter air. He had a cage built and delivered there in pieces, not iron. Iron was useless against a thing of fire, but a lattice of cold-forged silver and bound runes, a cage designed by the same maker in Prague who had built his instrument, a thing that could hold even a fire that remembered older skies. And he sat in the cottage in the evenings with the black glass instrument warm in his hand at last, warm because the thing it hunted was at last within its mile, 100 yards up the valley behind the castle's failing edge of ward, and he watched the warmth come and go as a dragon hunted the forest each night, and he learned its hours and its range and its habits, and he smiled his smile that did not reach his eyes. Soon, said Corvin Greaves to the cold north dark, to the warm point of light in his instrument, to the child and the dragon who did not know he had come 100 miles to sit above them and wait, let the law knock first, let it open the door, and then we shall see what flies out, and I shall be standing exactly where it lands. 100 yards up the valley in the cold hollow under the snow-laden trees, Ember lifted her head from Harry's shoulder and stared down the dark toward the village, the stars gone hard and flat in her gold eyes, a low sound starting deep in her throat, the same sound she had made at a shed window 5 years and 100 miles away, the night a cold, patient print first crossed the edge of the thread. What is it? Harry whispered, his hand going to her neck, his whole skin gone to goose flesh. Ember, what's wrong? But the cold had already banked, the night was only snow and silence. And Harry sat in the dark between his 2 friends with his dragon's warning fading under his hand, and did not yet know its name but knew its shape, knew with the certainty he had carried since the wood that the day he had been getting ready for his whole life had stopped being a someday. It had come north, it was sitting in the dark above him, and it was patient and it was close and it was nearly ready, so was he. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The threat the warrant came through in March, and the law walked into Hogwarts on a Tuesday, and Harry Potter understood that the day he had been getting ready for his whole life had finally arrived. He felt them before he saw them, 3 cold, orderly warmths crossing the grounds at the head of the morning, men who moved like the statutes they enforced, and at their center a 4th, the coldest, a tall, spare man with a leather case and a face that had decided every question it would ever be asked. Saul Brearley had his warrant signed and sealed, and his warrant gave him the right to search Hogwarts School for an illegally held dragon, and he meant to use every inch of it. Dumbledore met them at the gates and did what Dumbledore did, which was to make the law as slow as honey in winter. He could not refuse the warrant. Even Dumbledore could not refuse a sealed ministry warrant, but he could question its scope and dispute its procedure, and insist on accompanying every step of the search personally, and require that it be conducted without disrupting lessons, and in 100 small lawful ways turn a one-day seizure into a thing that would take a week. Harry watched it from a high window with Hermione's hand white on his arm, and understood that the old man was buying him time, and understood with a cold lurch that the old man knew, had known perhaps all along. He's protecting us, Hermione breathed. He's slowing them down, Harry said. It's not the same thing. He can't stop them. He can only give us time to decide what we do when they get to the forest, because the search would reach the forest. Brearley was thorough, and the forest was the obvious place, and there was no version of the next week in which a ministry seizure team did not eventually sweep the trees with detection spells built to find exactly what Ember was. The castle had hidden her. The forest had hidden her. Neither would hide her from men who had come specifically to look. The three of them held a war council that night in the cold hollow, with Ember's warmth at their backs and a week, at most, on the clock. Harry laid it out the way he laid out everything, the danger first. The search would tighten day by day, the detection spells would reach the forest by week's end, hiding was finished. Running was worse, a dragon fleeing across open Scotland was a beacon, and the bond would not survive him being caught and her being driven off, and anyway he was done running, had been done since the hut on the rock. Which left only the third thing, the thing he had been turning over in the dark since the broom tried to kill him in December. We don't wait to be found, he said. We choose the day, and we choose the ground, and we make the finding happen on our terms instead of theirs. If the secret has to end, and it does, it ends this week no matter what I do, then it ends in a way that leaves us standing, not in a way that leaves her in a cage. That's mad, said Ron with deep approval. How? It was Hermione who saw the shape of it, because Hermione saw the shape of everything. The other hunter, she said slowly. The one in the hills. Ember's been warning about him since December, the cold one, the one with the cage. He's been waiting up there all winter for exactly this, hasn't he? For the law to spook you into moving her out from under the wards so he can net her in the open and sell her. She looked at Harry, and her eyes were bright and fierce. He's using the ministry to flush her to him, so we use him right back. We let him think it's working. We walk straight into his trap, and we make sure the ministry walks in 2 minutes behind us. That was the plan, and they spent the week building it. Harry had been assembling the file on Greaves for 3 months without quite admitting why. The false-named lease above Hogsmeade he'd spotted on a flight behind Ember's eyes. The crates of cold-forged silver delivered in pieces. The Prague maker's mark he'd matched out of a library book, and now he finished it, cold and methodical, every fact a nail. Hermione drafted it into a dossier a ministry clerk could not ignore. Ron mapped the hills above the valley until he could walk them blind, and chose the cave and worked out the timings. And on the 7th night, when the search had reached the forest's edge and there was no more time, Harry sent Hedwig south with everything, the whole file on Corvin Greaves, addressed to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. Time to land on a duty desk an hour before midnight, and then he did the thing the trap had been built to make him do. He took Ember deeper into the forest than they had ever gone, miles in, past the edge of the school's failing wards and up into the wild hills above the valley, toward the cave he had chosen. And the moment he crossed the last ward line, he felt the wrongness bloom warm and ready and close, and felt Ember go rigid beside him with the stars gone flat, and let himself feel, for one cold breath, the size of what he was walking into on purpose. The cold, patient print was waiting up there, exactly where they had known it would be, the print he had carried at the edge of the thread since a shed window 5 years ago, blooming suddenly near. A man who had hunted them for 6 years with all the time in the world, who did not know that this time the boy had chosen the ground. Greaves, said a voice from the dark of the cave mouth, mild and gray and pleased. Corvin Greaves, I had wondered whether you knew. You are quite a remarkable child, Mr. Potter. I have admired your work for 6 years. The tall, thin gray man stepped out of the dark with a black glass instrument glowing warm in his hand and a wand held loose and easy in the other, and behind him, fanning out of the trees, came his hunters, 6 of them, hard, cold men in dragon handler's leather, carrying the long silver poles and the boundrew nets and the cold-forged weapons of a trade that caught the world's most dangerous creatures for money. 6 years to raise her. It is the finest piece of beastcraft I have seen in my life, and I have seen a great deal. You should be very proud. Where are my friends? Harry said, not a question. He had felt at the moment Greaves spoke that Ron and Hermione, who had peeled off into the dark below to wait for his signal, were not where the plan had put them, that 2 warmths had been taken on the way up, snatched from the dark by men who had been watching the trails. The plan had a hole in it. Greaves had found it first. Safe, said Greaves, for now 2 children plucked off a forest path while everyone fretted about the ministry's guests. No one will miss them until morning, and by morning this will all be concluded. They are quite unharmed, Mr. Potter, and they will remain so precisely as long as you are sensible. He lifted the black glass instrument, and it warmed, and somewhere in the dark behind him a net of silver and runes hummed to life. Here is the arithmetic, since I know you are fond of it. I do not want you, I do not want your friends. I want only the creature beside you, alive, unharmed, and folded small. You will give her to me into this cage willingly, and I will give you back your friends and leave, and you may tell the ministry whatever story you like about a dragon that was never found. Or you will refuse, and I will have her anyway, because 6 men with rune nets can take even a fire that remembers older skies, and your friends will pay the price of your refusal. The choice is yours. I am, as everyone who has ever dealt with me will tell you, a man of my word. Harry stood in the cold dark with his dragon beside him and his friends taken into the night and 6 hunters fanning out around him, and he did the arithmetic fast the way he had done it his whole life, and he found at the bottom of it that Greaves had thought farther ahead than Harry had expected, had taken the hostages the plan had not accounted for, and that this would now cost more than they had meant to pay. But he found, too, that the spine of the plan still held. Because Greaves had made exactly one mistake, and it was the same mistake everyone had always made about Harry Potter. They thought he was the one being trapped. You've been planning this for 6 years, Harry said, and his voice was very calm, the flat, cold voice, the cupboard voice, the voice that gave nothing away. So have I you think I walked her up here because the law spooked me? I walked her up here because I've known since I was 9 that this day was coming, and I decided a long time ago that when it came, I'd choose the ground. He let that sit. You think you tipped off the ministry to flush her. You did, but somebody tipped off the ministry about you too, Mr. Greaves. About a notorious unregistered dealer who took a long winter lease above Hogsmeade under a false name, and had a cold forged silver cage delivered in pieces, and has been sitting in the hills for 3 months waiting to net a dragon the law is hunting, so that he can sell it. I wonder which of us the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures would rather take home tonight, the child who raised a dragon out of love, or the trafficker who came to steal it. For the first time the gray mild face changed. You're bluffing, said Greaves. There's no one up here but us. There wasn't, Harry agreed, until you started the search clock by getting your warrant signed. The moment the law was on the grounds, I sent everything I have on you south by Owl, the cottage, the false name, the cage, the prog maker, all of it, time to land on a duty desk an hour ago. I've been building that file for 3 months, Mr. Greaves. The same 3 months you've been sitting up here building yours. You taught me how. You used the law as a battering ram and stood behind the door. So did I. Harry tilted his head, the cold attention. Listen. And out of the dark below, faint and growing, came the sound of men coming up through the trees, many men fast, the cold orderly warmth of a ministry seizure team that had been redirected mid-search by an all-born dossier, and the smell of the very crime they existed to stop, climbing the hill toward a notorious dragon trafficker caught in the act, with a cage and a crew and a wand pointed at a child. Greaves's face went still and gray and final, and he made the choice that cold, patient men make when patience has run out. He abandoned the long game and reached for the short one. Net it, he said to his hunters. Now, all of it, we take it and we go before they reach the ridge. 6 men moved at once, and the nets of silver and runes hummed up into the dark, and Harry Potter looked at his dragon and let go of the leash he had held for 6 years. Now, he said, it matters, be the fire. Ember unfolded. She had never done it before where the sky could see. She did it now all at once, the held breath of 6 years let go in a single instant, the pony-sized shape beside Harry drawing not inward as it did to fold, but outward, vast and sudden, mass pouring out of mass the way a struck match pours out light, until she stood over the hilltop with her wings blotting the stars and her head higher than the cave mouth and the ember gold veins under her black scales running bright as poured metal. And the dark around her did not fill with shadow because her light had never thrown one, it filled instead with the strange shadowless glow of fire that remembered older skies, a light the color of the moment after burning, and every man on that hilltop saw, for the first time in the world's long memory, what a long-fired dragon looked like when it stopped pretending to be small. She was the size of the cave. She was the size of a house. She was the thing the registry had never named because the men who wrote it had never lived to write it down. And she looked at the 6 men who had brought silver nets to cage her and cold weapons to break her, and a man who had spent 6 years planning to sell her. And the cold lethal arithmetic that Harry had held on its leash since the day Dudley nearly died came off the leash entire, and this time he did not say not fire, and this time he did not say quiet, and this time he did not say no. The first net came up and she took it out of the air with a single beat of one wing and a breath, and the breath was the thing the world had forgotten. Not the gout of orange flame the registry described for its 10 poor breeds, but a long white cord lance of fire that did not spread and did not waste, that went exactly where she sent it and burned exactly what she chose. And the silver net was not there anymore, and neither was the man who had thrown it. The hunters were professionals. They had caught horntails and ironbellies. They had never met a thing that aimed. Two of them tried to flank her with the long silver poles, the way you took a wild dragon, from the sides where it could not turn, and learned that a long-fired dragon did not turn its body to face a threat. It simply decided where the threat was and was already there, faster than a thing the size of a house had any right to move. A third loosed the cold-forged net gun built to pierce dragonhide and pin a wing, and the bolt sparked and slid and died against scales black as the space between stars. And Ember took him the quiet way, without light, the way she had taken the lurcher in the wood, because Harry's three friends were somewhere close in the dark and fire was not safe near them. In less than a minute the hilltop was hers and the hunters were down, and the only warmths left standing on it were a boy, a gray man, and Harry found them the instant the fold let go, two terrified warmths bound at the cave's edge, Ron and Hermione, whom he pulled free of their bindings with a word and a wrench and drew behind the shelter of his dragon's wing. Greaves did not run. Harry would think about that after. The man stood in the wreck of his 6-year plan with his wand in his hand and his hunters dead around him, and a dragon out of legend turning its star-cored eyes on him. And he did the last thing Harry expected, which was to lower the wand and look up at Ember with something on his gray face that was not fear at all but a terrible covetous wonder, the look of a man seeing at the very end the single most beautiful thing he will ever fail to own. "Magnificent," whispered Corvin Greaves, gazing up into the eyes of the creature that was about to kill him. "Worth every year, worth all of it. Do you know, in 40 years of this trade, I have never once seen a thing I would have given my life to." He never finished, and Harry never let her finish him either, because at that moment the ministry team broke over the ridge, wands blazing, and Saul Brearley came up out of the dark at their head, and stopped dead at the edge of the firelight, and saw the whole impossible truth of it laid out plain. The cage of cold-forged silver, the dead hunters and their handlers' leather, the notorious trafficker standing over the wreck of an illegal seizure in steel, and at the center of it all, vast and shadowless and terrible and unmistakably, undeniably defending the 3 children sheltered beneath her wing, a dragon that no law on his books had a name for, doing the one thing his 20 years of certainty had told him a dragon in private hands could never do. It was protecting. "Hold," Harry said down the thread, and Ember held the killing blow she had been about to deliver to Greaves arrested in the air, because Harry had looked far again, had seen that a smuggler killed by the dragon was a tragedy the law could hang on Harry's neck, but a smuggler taken alive in the act, before witnesses, by the very ministry that had come to destroy the dragon, was a thing that changed everything. Ember held, shaking with the want of it, and Harry stepped out from under her wing into the firelight, between his dragon and the law, with his 2 friends behind him and his hand raised flat and open and full of soft red flame, and faced Saul Brearley across the bodies of the men who had come to steal her. "My name is Harry Potter," he said in the calm, cold voice, the voice that had given nothing away for 11 years and now, deliberately, gave everything. "This is Ember. I hatched her by accident when I was 6 years old and alone, and she imprinted on me, and I have raised her in secret every day since, because your law says you would destroy her, and she has never in 6 years harmed a living soul who did not first come to harm me or someone I love." That man, he did not look at Greaves. He kept his eyes on Brearley, is Corvin Greaves, an unregistered dealer who has hunted her for 6 years to sell her, who kidnapped my friends tonight to force me to hand her over, and whose entire operation is documented in a file my owl delivered to your department an hour ago. You came up this hill to enforce a law against a dangerous beast in private hands. He let the flame in his palm climb just a little, harmless and bright, so the man could see it did not burn him. "Look at what you actually found, and then tell me which of us your law was written to stop." For a long moment the only sound on the hilltop was the wind and the crackle of dying silver, and Saul Brearley, lawful, immovable, 20 years certain, stood at the edge of the firelight and looked at a child standing unburned in dragonfire between a smuggler and a creature that had chosen, against every instinct, not to kill. And Harry watched the certainty in the man's face crack the way Harry's own wall had cracked the night of the troll, and understood that he had won the only victory that mattered. He had made the law look with its own eyes at a thing it had a rule against but had never once seen. Brearley's wand came up, but it did not point at the dragon. "Corvin Greaves," he said, in the dead-level voice of the statute itself, turning it at last on the gray man standing wandless among his dead. "You are under arrest for trafficking in regulated creatures, for the abduction of 2 minors, and for a great many things I expect that file will tell me. Take him." And his team moved, and the cold, patient man who had hunted Harry Potter for 6 years was bound and silenced and led away down the dark hill. And at the cave mouth he turned once and looked back, not at Brearley and not at Harry, but up at Ember, one last covetous, worshipping look at the most beautiful thing he had ever failed to own. And then the dark took him, and the trade in caged fire lost its most patient hand, and it was over. Almost over. Because the law still stood on the hilltop, and the dragon still stood in the open under the stars. And 100 feet down the hill the rest of the ministry team and the staff of Hogwarts and a straggling tail of students who had followed the commotion out of the castle had reached the firelight. and they were all of them staring at a thing out of legend, vast and shadowless and terrible, with 3 children sheltered under her wing and a green-eyed boy standing unburned in her fire. And Harry Potter understood that the secret he had kept for 6 years, the secret he had hidden in a cupboard, in a shed, in a tower, in a forest, the secret that had cost him every careful lie of his careful life, was now standing in the open in front of half the school and all of the law, and could never, ever be hidden again. He had spent his whole life getting ready for the day he was found. He looked up at his dragon, vast and patient in his, the stars in her eyes and the stars in the sky and the fire in them both, and down the thread he felt her ask the only question she had ever asked him. The question from the cupboard, the question from the shed, the question from the tower window, what now, what do we do, where do we go? And Harry Potter, 11 years old, standing unburned in dragon fire in front of the whole watching world, gave her the answer he had been getting ready to give since he was 6 years old, and decided in the dark that no one would ever take her. Now, he said, loud enough for all of them to hear, the cupboard child gone for good, we stop hiding. And he did not fold her. He did not send her into the dark. He stood in the open under the wing of the dragon no one had known existed, in front of the law and the school and the whole staring world, and let them see. For a long moment nobody on the hilltop moved, and the firelight that threw no shadows lay over 100 upturned faces, and Harry stood in it and did not look away from a single one of them. Then the crowd at the ridge parted, and Albus Dumbledore came up through it. He came without hurry, a tall old man in midnight robes with his half-moon glasses catching the shadowless light, and he crossed the hilltop between the dead hunters and the silver wreckage and stopped beside Harry, beneath the wing of a dragon the size of a house, and looked up at Ember with an expression Harry had never seen on a grown-up's face before, not fear, not greed, not the flat official blankness of the law, but a deep and aching wonder. The look of a man who has lived 100 years and read every book and believed he had run out of new things to be astonished by and has just been proven wrong. So, Dumbledore said softly, and there was something in his voice that might have been grief and might have been joy. There you are. I have felt you in my castle since September, and I confess I had begun to hope I might live long enough to be properly introduced. He inclined his head to the dragon gravely, as to an equal, and Harry felt down the thread the strangest thing, felt Ember study the old man with the cold measuring sense she turned on every new thing, and felt the cold find no threat in him, and felt her lower her vast head, by a fraction, in something that was almost a return of the courtesy. Then Dumbledore turned to Saul Brearley, and the gentleness went out of him, and what was left was the thing that had made dark wizards afraid for 50 years. Saul, he said, you came to my school to destroy a child's dragon. Instead you have arrested a trafficker, recovered 2 kidnapped students, and witnessed with your own eyes a class of creature your department's records insist has been extinct for 400 years, in the act of choosing mercy when it might have chosen slaughter. I think you will agree the night has rather exceeded the scope of your warrant. Brearley did not flinch, because Brearley was made of the same cold stuff as the law he served, and the law did not flinch. But Harry, watching with the sense that red warmth, saw the certainty in the man waver, saw 20 years of unbroken conviction meet a thing it had no shelf to file it on. The warrant, Brearley said slowly, is for an illegally held dragon. I have found one. The law does not care how it was raised, or whom it has spared, or what it chooses. The law says it must be confiscated and destroyed, and the keeper prosecuted. That is not my cruelty, headmaster. That is the statute. I did not write it. I am only the man who must answer for it. No, said Harry quietly, and every eye on the hilltop came to him. The statute is for dragons. I read it. Class XXXXX, the 10 registered breeds, every one of them named and described, and she isn't one of them. She isn't on your list. Your law was written for 10 kinds of fire, and she is the 11th, the one nobody alive has ever seen, the one your records gave up for dead 400 years ago. You can't confiscate and destroy a thing your statute has no name for. There's no provision. There's no procedure. There's just a gap in the law the size of a dragon, and she's standing in it. He looked at Brearley, and he was 11 years old and unburned in dragon fire and entirely without fear. You'll have to write a new law to take her, and before you write it, you'll have to decide what you actually saw up here tonight, a monster or a guardian. Saul Brearley looked at him for a long time. Then he looked once more up at Ember, at the vast shadowless creature who had killed 6 armed hunters in under a minute, and stopped, at a boy's word, a hair short of a 7th, who stood now with 3 children sheltered beneath her wing, and her stark-ored eyes turned watchful and patient over them. And something in the man's cold, orderly face did a thing it had not done in 20 years, which was to admit that it did not know the answer. That, he said at last heavily, is a question above my office. And above my warrant. He turned to his team. Secure the prisoner, recover the dead, we take nothing else off this hill tonight. And to Harry in the dead-level voice, but with something underneath it now that had not been there before, this is not finished, Mr. Potter. There will be a reckoning, hearings, the department, the Wisengamot, people far above me who will want to put your creature in a category and your name in a file. You have not won. You have only made it a question that must be answered in the open, instead of a thing done quietly in the dark. He paused. Whether that was wise, I do not yet know, but it was brave, I will give you that. He went down the hill into the dark with his team and his prisoner, and his certainty cracked clean through, and the students drew back to let him pass and then turned, all of them, to stare again at the dragon and the boy. Harry felt the after-everything tremor start in Ember, the fold want, the come-down from the killing, the deep need to be small and near him now that it was over, and he reached up the thread and gave her the only thing there was to give, which was safe, done, mine, come here. And the dragon the size of a house drew herself inward, down and down, not all the way to folded but down to the pony size that could stand beside a boy. And she came to him across the firelit hill and lowered her great head and pressed it against his chest the way she had pressed it in a cupboard when she was an hour old. And Harry put both arms around her and bowed his head over her in front of the law and the school and the whole staring world, and let himself feel for one clean breath. The thing he had been getting ready 6 years to feel, he had been found. The worst thing, the thing he had feared since he was 6 and dreaded since the wood and planned against every single day of his careful invisible life, it had happened. They had seen her, they had seen him. The secret was over and could never be put back, and he was still standing, she was still beside him. No one had taken her. The cupboard child had been so afraid of being seen that he had built a whole life out of the dark, and now he stood in the open under 100 staring eyes with his dragon's head against his chest, and the sky had not fallen, and the worst day of his life had turned out to be the day he stopped being afraid. "It's over," he whispered into her, too low for any of them to hear. "The hiding, it's over, we don't have to do it anymore." Down the thread came her answer, warm and tired and certain, and under it, banked now and quiet, the cold thing that had kept him alive for 6 years, settling at last into something that was not a leash and not a weapon but only love, finally allowed to be seen for what it was. But Brearley had been right about one thing, and Harry knew it even as he stood there in the warmth of the ending. It was not finished. Down the dark hill the law was already drafting its questions. Somewhere in London a department would open a new file, and a Wisengamot would convene, and men far above a single enforcer would argue about categories and precedents and the gap in the statute the size of a dragon. The threat of the cage was gone. The threat of the law was only beginning. He had won the night. The reckoning was still to come. And Harry Potter, standing unhidden under the stars with his dragon and his 2 friends and a watching world, found that he was, for the first time in his life, ready to be reckoned with. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Rider and Dragon Harry woke the morning after the hilltop in his own 4-poster, with the hangings open, for the first time in 6 years, and a dragon asleep in plain sight across the foot of his bed, and for one disoriented heartbeat he came up out of sleep in pure animal terror, because Ember was visible, Ember was uncovered, anyone could see, and then he remembered, and the terror went out of him all at once and left something behind it he had no name for. They could see. That was the new fact of the world, and it would take him weeks to stop flinching from it. The hangings were open, and Ron was sitting up in the next bed grinning at him, and Hermione was already there at some impossible early hour with a stack of books on dragon law balanced on her knees, and Ember lay across the foot of the bed pony-sized and unhidden in the gray dawn light, and not one of them was afraid, and Harry lay still and let the strangeness of it move through him like cold water. "You're famous all over again," Ron announced with relish. The whole school saw there were 4th years crying. McGonagall's posted a notice that nobody's to go near her without you there, and Peeves has made up a song, and Malfoy's been telling everyone his father will have it destroyed, and nobody's listening to him because everybody saw her stop. That's the thing they keep saying, she could have killed everyone and she stopped. He shook his head, awed all over again. Mental, the whole thing's completely mental. "Best night of my life. What happened to Greaves?" Harry said. "First things first, always. Holding cell in the Ministry," said Hermione, not looking up from her book. "Brearley's team took him and the survivors. There were 3 of his men still alive, the ones Ember didn't anyway. The file you sent did exactly what you wanted. They've already started rolling up his buyers. Professor Dumbledore had a letter this morning. He's finished, Harry. Whatever else happens, the man who hunted you for 6 years is finished." She turned a page, "which leaves the law, and that's the part we have to win, because the law had not gone away." McGonagall had told him as much the night before, white-lipped and shaken, before she let him sleep. That Brearley's warrant was suspended, not withdrawn, that the question of the dragon was now too large for a single enforcer and had gone up the chain to the Wisengamot itself, that there would be a hearing in 3 weeks at which the assembled government of magical Britain would decide whether Harry Potter could keep the thing he loved or whether the law would take it after all. The cage was gone. The statute remained. He had traded a hunter in the dark for a courtroom in the light, and Harry, lying in the dawn with his dragon visible across his feet, understood that he had not won anything yet. He had only changed the ground of the fight, from a thing done quietly in the hills to a thing argued in the open before the whole world, which was, he had decided, on the hilltop, the only ground on which he could possibly win. He got up. He went to Ember and put his hands on her warm black head and felt her wake under his touch, and felt her feel the same disorientation he had felt, the reaching, out of old habit, for the fold, for small, for hidden, and then the slow, strange letting go as she remembered that she did not have to. They stood together in the dawn, the boy and the dragon, learning the first morning of a life with nothing left to hide, and it was terrifying and it was enormous and it was, underneath everything, a relief so deep that Harry's eyes stung with it. "We don't hide today," he said to her quietly, trying the words out, testing whether they could possibly be true. "We don't hide today, and we don't hide tomorrow, and if I do this right, we never hide again." Down the thread came her answer, warm and uncertain and willing, the willingness of a creature who had spent her whole short life folded small in the dark and would have to learn now how to be a fire in the open, and Harry understood that the unhiding would be its own kind of work, as hard in its way as the hiding had been, and that they would learn it together as they had learned everything. He went down to breakfast that morning with a dragon walking at his side through the castle corridors for the first time in daylight, and the whole great hall went silent when he entered, 500 faces turning, and Harry Potter, who had spent 11 years making himself invisible, who had given the world a flat, dead face since before he could remember why, stopped in the doorway with his dragon beside him, and made himself do the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the hilltop. Harder than the cupboard. He lifted his head and let them look and did not look away. It got easier after that, not easy, easier. Each day the flinch came a little less. Each day the muscle he had held tight since he was 6 let go a little more. The thing he had not expected in those first unhidden days was how much of the relief belonged to Ron and Hermione. He had thought of the secret as his to carry, and the sharing of it since the troll as a danger he had allowed for their sake. He had not understood until now that they had been carrying it too, every day since Halloween, the lies to teachers, the patrols dodged, the constant low hum of dread, and that the end of the hiding lifted the same weight off them that it lifted off him. He found Ron, the second evening, sitting out on the lawn with Ember's great head in his lap, feeding her bits of sausage smuggled from supper, and talking to her in a low, steady stream of nonsense about Quidditch and his brothers, entirely unafraid, entirely at home. He found Hermione had reorganized her entire revision schedule around dragon law and ward maintenance and seemed happier than he had ever seen her, because Hermione was a girl who needed an impossible problem to be fully alive, and Harry had handed her the most impossible problem in magical Britain. "You don't have to do this," he told her, watching her annotate a 400-year-old chronicle by wandlight. "Any of it. The hearing's mine, the risk's mine. You and Ron could step back now and nobody would ever know you were part of it." Hermione looked up at him over the top of the book with an expression that suggested he had said something not merely wrong but actively stupid. "Harry," she said, "I was going to be cleverest friendless for 7 years. You and Ron and a dragon are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I am not stepping back from the best thing that has ever happened to me because it might be dangerous, honestly." And she went back to her book, and Ron laughed from the lawn, and Ember down the thread sent Harry a warmth that was not quite about him for once, a warmth aimed at the red-haired boy and the fierce, clever girl, the people her person had chosen, who had become, by the strange arithmetic of love, hers to guard as well. He sat with the three of them in the long spring evening, the dragon and his 2 friends, and let himself feel a thing he had felt exactly once before, the night he first imagined a circle of 3 on the train, and had been too careful then to let grow. He let it grow now. He was not alone. He had not been alone since he was 6, but he had been alone with Ember, just the 2 of them against the whole world, and now the 2 of them were 4, and the 4 of them were something the world would have a very hard time taking apart. It was the warmest thing the unhiding gave him, warmer even than the open sky. He had spent his whole life believing that the only safe number of people to love was 1 dragon. He was beginning to suspect he had been wrong, and that being wrong about it was the best mistake he had ever made. The 3 weeks between the hilltop and the hearing were the strangest of Harry Potter's life, because for the first time in it he had nothing left to hide. It did not feel the way he had feared. He had spent 6 years imagining discovery as a catastrophe, a door blown open, the end of everything, and instead it was a slow, strange unclenching, a muscle he had held tight since he was 6, finally, cautiously beginning to let go. He still set the protocols out of habit each morning before he remembered he did not need them. He still reached 12 times a day to bank the warmth in his chest before it showed, and then stopped because there was no longer anyone he had to hide it from. The whole school knew. The whole school had watched a dragon rise out of the firelit hills with 3 children under her wing, and the whole school, in the way of schools, had decided overnight that Harry Potter, odd, quiet, invisible Harry Potter, was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to it. Most of them were afraid of her, which was sensible. Some of them, the younger ones especially, were not afraid at all, and took to gathering at a respectful distance on the lawn in the evenings to watch Ember sun herself on the rocks above the lake, pony-sized and tolerant, the ember gold banked low, one starcored eye half open on the crowd of small staring witches and wizards as if they were a faintly interesting kind of weather. Draco Malfoy had tried to make something of it, had sneered in the corridor that a dragon was a beast and a beast should be put down and his father would hear of it, and Ember, folded against Harry's ribs, had turned one eye open in the dark of his robes and looked at the pale boy, just looked, and something in Draco had gone very quiet and very still, and he had not raised the subject again. Snape watched Harry now with a different suspicion than before, a wary recalculation, the look of a man who had been right that the Potter boy was hiding something and wrong about everything else. And Harry let them all look, and found to his endless surprise that being looked at no longer felt like a wound, but the moment that undid him, the moment he had not prepared for, was Hagrid. He had been dreading it and longing for it in equal measure, because Hagrid was the one man in the world he had had to be most careful of, the one whose love of dragons had nearly pulled Ember out of the fold in a storm-wrecked hut a lifetime ago, and now there was nothing left to be careful about. So on the third day, with Dumbledore's blessing, Harry took Ember down to the edge of the forest where Hagrid waited by his hut, twisting his enormous hands in his apron, his great beetle eyes already wet before anything had happened at all. Ember unfolded on the grass in the spring light, pony-sized, and Hagrid looked at her, and made a sound Harry had never heard a grown man make, a sort of broken, wondering sob, and sank down on his knees in the mud so as not to loom over her, and held out one vast trembling hand. "Oh," Hagrid breathed, "oh yeah, beauty, oh yeah, I always knew there were something 6 years, and yeah, had her the whole, oh Harry." And Ember, who had never in her life been allowed to be known by the one man who would have loved her on sight, who had wanted it so badly in a storm-wrecked hut that she had nearly broken 6 years of discipline for it. Ember crossed the grass to Hagrid and laid her great head into his huge open hands and let him weep over her, and down the thread Harry felt her feel it, felt her take in the thing she had wanted since the hut. The warmth of being known and called beautiful by someone whose whole heart meant it, and Harry stood in the spring sun and watched his dragon meet the friend he had hidden her from and had to look away because some things were too much to watch straight on. "I had to keep her from you," Harry said when he could. "You were the most dangerous person in the world to me, Hagrid, not because you'd have hurt her, because you'd have loved her and she'd have wanted to come out. You were the one I couldn't risk." "I know," Hagrid said thickly, one hand still cupped around Ember's jaw, the dragon's eyes half closed under his touch. "I know it, Harry, and ye were right to, but ye don't have to anymore, that's the thing, ain't it? Ye don't have to anymore." And he laughed, wet and enormous, and it was the truest thing anyone had said to Harry since the hilltop, and Harry let himself believe it. The rest of the 3 weeks went to building the case, because winning the hilltop had only bought him the right to fight in the chamber, and Harry meant to win that too. Dumbledore drafted and Hermione researched, and Harry, who had spent his life thinking 3 moves ahead of cruel people, applied the same cold care to the Wisengamot that he had applied to the Dursleys and to Greaves. They had the healers examine him and Ember and write down in clinical language, the thing Harry had known in his body for years, that the bond could not be severed without killing them both. They had Hermione assemble the precedents, the old chronicles of writers, dusty and dismissed, that proved the thing had once been lawful and ordinary. They had the file on Greaves and the dozen arrests it had already produced, to show the court which kind of dragon keeper the law had actually been protecting the world from. And Harry made his single condition, and held to it against all of Dumbledore's gentle doubt, that he would not be tried in absence of his dragon, that whatever the Wisengamot decided, it would decide it looking at her. "A thing unseen is easy to destroy," he told Dumbledore in the circular office, the spring light slanting through the high windows. "I learned that the hard way. They wrote a law that says destroy because the only dragons they ever pictured were monsters in a description. If they have to sit in a room with her, if they have to feel what she is, they can't picture a monster anymore. They have to look at the truth and decide what to do about it. That's the only fight I can win, so that's the fight I'm going to make them have." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment over the half-moon glasses, and there was something in the old face that might have been pride and might have been grief and was probably both. "You are a very dangerous young man, Harry," he said softly. "And I find I am extremely glad you are on the side of love. Let us go and make them look." The reckoning came in a cold, deep chamber beneath London, and Harry Potter walked into it the way he had walked into everything for 6 years, having already decided he would not lose. They held the hearing in the lowest court of the Wisengamot, a circular pit of tiered stone benches packed with purple-robed witches and wizards, the great and the grey of magical Britain come to decide the question Brearley had carried down from the hilltop. There was no friendly face among the rows, only the cold collective weight of a government confronting a hole in its own statutes, and at the center of the floor alone stood an 11-year-old in borrowed robes with a folded dragon warm against his ribs. It was Brearley who spoke for the department, and Harry had wondered which Brearley would come, the immovable one from the file, or the one whose certainty had cracked on the hill. It was, he found, both. The man laid out the law with scrupulous honesty, the ban, the seizure provisions, the word destroyed, the long bleak record of dragons in private hands that had ended in fire and death. He did not soften it. But when he had finished the case the law required him to make, he set down his notes and added a thing the law did not require. "I have enforced this statute for 20 years, Brearley told the silent purple rose. I have destroyed 11 dragons. Every one of them was a danger, and every destruction was lawful, and I regret none of it. But I was on that hilltop 3 weeks ago, and I saw a thing I cannot reconcile with 20 years of certainty. I saw a creature that could have killed 40 people in under a minute kill only the 6 armed men who had come to cage it and stop, at a child's word, a hair short of a seventh, a defenseless prisoner. I have never seen a wild dragon stop. I have never seen a wild dragon choose. Whatever stood on that hill, members of the Wisengamot, it was not the thing my statute was written to guard against. And I will not ask this court to destroy it on the strength of a law that never imagined it could exist. That is all I have to say. He sat down, and a murmur went round the chamber, and Harry felt the first plank of the thing shift under him. The chief warlock, an old severe witch with the Wisengamot's authority graven into her face, fixed Harry with a cold eye and asked the question the whole chamber had come to ask: why the creature should not, in the interest of public safety, simply be removed from him and confined, registered, kept somewhere secure and far from a school full of children. And Harry answered it not with an argument but with the truth, because the truth, shown plainly, was the strongest argument there was. "Because you can't remove her from me," he said. "Not because I won't let you, because it can't be done. We're not a boy and his pet. When I was 6 years old and alone, she imprinted on me the way her kind does, the way nobody alive remembers, because nobody alive has seen her kind, and an imprint like that isn't a leash you can cut. It's one fire in 2 bodies. I can feel her heartbeat from a mile away. I can see through her eyes. I haven't been cold since I was 7 because her warmth lives in me now here." He touched his own chest, 2 inches left of the breastbone, "and her fire answers my hand because we're made of the same thing. If you take her to the other end of the country and put her in a vault, you won't get a safe dragon and a normal boy. You'll get 2 halves of one creature dying slowly in 2 places. The healers can tell you, the report is in front of you." He let that sit, watching the purple rose turn pages. "You keep asking how to separate us safely. There's no safe way. There's only a slow way and a fast way, and they both end the same." The chief warlock's cold eye did not waver. "Then perhaps," she said, "the kinder course is the fast way, for both of you. A dragon that cannot be safely separated from a child is a dragon that endangers that child every day of his life." It was the cruelest thing anyone had said, and it was said without cruelty, in the flat, lawful voice of a government weighing a problem, and the chamber went very quiet, and Harry felt the cold thing he had learned from Ember rise in him and held it, because this was a place words won and fire lost. But it was not Harry who answered the chief warlock, it was Ember. He felt her decide to do it before she did, felt the will of it gather down the thread, and then, for the first time in 6 years, in front of the assembled government of magical Britain, his dragon spoke, not in sound. She unfolded from the breast of his robes, slow and deliberate, up onto his shoulder and then to her pony size on the chamber floor beside him, and the purple rose recoiled and wands came out all round the pit, and Ember ignored every one of them and turned her star-cored eyes on the chief warlock and pushed her voice for the first time past Harry and out into the open, into the mind of every witch and wizard in that chamber at once. It was not words, it was what lived under words. Harry felt it go out of her and into all of them, and he felt them feel it, the thing he had felt in a cupboard at 6 and never had language for. The total, absolute, unhesitating love of a creature for the one being it had chosen. A love with no fear in it and no hesitation and no end. The love that had kept a starving child warm in the dark and would burn the world down to keep him, and had instead, again and again, chosen not to because he had asked. She showed them the cupboard. She showed them the shed, the bin scraps, the nights he read to her in the dark. She showed them the troll, and the leash held a hair short of slaughter. She showed them last the thing the chief warlock had just proposed, the fast way, the kind way, the end, and she showed them her answer to it, which was not rage but a grief so vast and so ancient that several of the old witches in the front rows put their hands to their mouths. The grief of a thing that had been alone for 200 years in an egg, and had woken to one warmth in all the world, and would not, could not, would never give it up. Then she drew the voice back into herself and folded down again to silence and laid her great head against Harry's side, and the chamber sat in stunned and ringing quiet, and Harry understood that the bond had just done what no argument of his ever could. It had made them feel what could not be filed. "You asked how to separate us safely," Harry said into the silence very quietly. She just answered you. "There is no category in your law for what we are, so you have 2 choices. You can make a new one, or you can be the government that killed a boy and the last dragon of a line older than your registry because they loved each other and you had no box to put it in." Dumbledore rose then to do the last of the work, and the work he did was the work only Albus Dumbledore could have done. He did not plead, he proposed. He laid before the Wisengamot a thing he had been drafting for 3 weeks, a new classification, an exception written into the statute, category of 1. The creature called Ember to be recognized not as a beast in private keeping, but as a bonded companion, an imprinted familiar of a class unseen in 4 centuries. The boy Harry Potter to be recognized as her rider, the first in Britain since the writers of the old chronicles. the pair to be permitted to remain at Hogwarts under the headmaster's personal guarantee and a regime of wards Hermione Granger's research had half designed already. The department to retain oversight to inspect, to be satisfied of safety, but not to seize and not to destroy, because there was nothing on the registry to seize and no provision to destroy, and now no will in the chamber to try. He bound his own name and his own authority to the guarantee. And he closed by reminding the Wisengamot in the mild, dangerous voice that they had just felt with their own hearts what kind of creature they were being asked to kill, and that history remembered the governments that chose fear over wonder and seldom kindly. They argued for 2 hours, but Harry had known from the moment Ember's grief went out into the chamber that he had already won, because you could vote against an argument, but it was very hard to vote against a thing that had broken your own heart. When the vote came, it came down narrow and grudging and historic. The exception passed. The category of one was written, and Harry Potter walked up out of the cold, deep chamber beneath London into the spring light, unhidden and lawful, and accompanied, the first rider in 400 years, with the threat of the cage and the threat of the law both at last behind him. Not gone. He was too much his careful self to think them gone. Greaves's network had been rolled up, but trades like that grew back, and there would be other buyers and other patient men, and somewhere in the Purple Rose there were witches and wizards who had voted yes from fear and would vote differently if the wind changed. Brearley would inspect them twice a year for the rest of his life, and his certainty, though cracked, would never wholly heal. The threat was banked, not erased. Harry knew the difference. He had been banking fires his whole life. But that was tomorrow's arithmetic, and tonight there was the thing he had earned, and Ember told him at last what she was. She did it that evening, back at the castle, the two of them alone on the high, cold shoulder of the mountain above the forest where they had gone to be away from the staring and the questions and the new strange weight of being seen. She unfolded to her full war dragon size under the dusk, the ember gold running bright, and she laid herself down on the stone and curled around him the way she had curled around him in a shed when she was the size of a dog, and she pushed her voice into his mind, clear now, clearer than it had ever been, 6 years of growing into a thing that could almost make words, and she told him. She showed him the older skies. She showed him what her line had been long ago, before the registry, before the breeds, before the men who wrote laws about fire had learned to hold a quill. The long fire, the dragons that did not burn but chose, that bonded once in an age to a single soul and flew with it and grieved it forever after. The writers and their dragons out of the chronicles the wizards thought were only stories. She showed him why the world had forgotten, that her kind had bonded too deeply and too rarely, that when the writers died the dragons would not take another, that a line that loves like that does not breed like a beast and dwindles, age by age, into legend and then into nothing, into a last few eggs gone dormant, waiting 200 years in the dark for one more soul desperate enough and warm enough to wake them. She showed him a starving child in a cupboard who had wanted, with his whole undivided heart, for the world to stop being the world. And she showed him last the thing he had wondered about since he was 6 and named her in the dark, that her kind did not take names from outside, that a long-fire dragon was its own and named by nothing, and that she had taken his name anyway, had kept it for 6 years and would keep it for the rest of both their lives, because it was the first thing anyone had ever given her freely in the dark, asking nothing back. Ember. He had called her Ember because she was the only warm thing in a cold house, and she had taken it, and she would be Ember now until the stars went out, because he had named her out of love, and not one creature in 200 years had loved her at all. Harry sat on the cold mountain with his arms around the neck of a dragon out of legend, the last of a line older than the law, and he did not try to find words for what he felt, because some things you felt once clean and carried. He had felt it in the cupboard and at the tower window and on the firelit hill. He felt it now, the whole of it, and let it fill him and put none of it away because the hiding was over, and a thing felt in the open did not have to be folded small and hidden behind the ribs anymore. "Come on," he said at last, standing, his voice thick and steady. "Let's not hide it, not anymore, let them see." And Harry Potter climbed onto the back of his dragon between the great black wings, where the writers of the old chronicles had sat 400 years ago and no one had sat since, and Ember rose up off the cold mountain into the last of the dusk light, and beat her wings once twice and climbed, not folded, not hidden, not in the dead hour with the world asleep, but openly, into a sky still bright enough that the watchers on the castle walls below could see them. A boy and a dragon black against the burning west, rising. Below, the lit windows of Hogwarts came on one by one, and faces turned up to the sky and pointed and did not look away. Down the thread came Ember's joy, vast and shadowless and unhidden, the joy of fire let free in the open at last, and Harry's joy answered it, the same fire in 2 bodies, the cupboard child gone for good, burned away to nothing on a mountain in the dusk, and replaced by the thing he had promised her he would build 6 years ago in a garden shed. Something nobody could take. They flew over the dark forest and the bright castle and the long silver lake, rider and dragon, ascendant, while the whole world watched from below, and for the first time in his life Harry Potter did not care who was looking. He had spent 6 years afraid of being seen. Now he rode the open sky on the back of a dragon and let the world look its fill. Chapter 7 end.